expecting a fight. All most of us had on us were daggers and knives. They killed some of us, but they were trying to take us prisoner, not kill us all. Something got me at the back of my head, and when I came to, I and the others were being dragged into tunnels in the base of the crag that we hadn't noticed, and then upstairs lit by driftwood torches. Eventually we reached a great hall with pillars, and at the end was a dais and a chair and a man that realized was the actual oldest person I'd ever seen. He was dressed in what might once have been white robes, but which were now filthy and, well, he looked like a madder and more ancient version of Aerys Targaryen. Long white hair, eyes that were wide and bloodshot, fingernails that were long and twisted. Oh, and he was far madder than Aerys had even been. Aerys had been sane compared with this lunatic. All he spoke was Old High Valyrian, and the only volume he knew was the top of his voice. The last Dragon Lord he called himself, but if he had a name he never said it. I just named him the lunatic. We were traitors, he said, traitors and spies and thieves, trying to take his great work from him, or at least that was what I thought he said. They dragged us from the room and into a large cell. His uncle paused for a long moment and then accepted a wineskin from his son, who was watching him worriedly. "Thank you, my boy," he said after drinking. He smiled at Tyrion. "He worries about me sometimes. This is the part of the tale that starts to bring back nightmares sometimes. We were prisoners for days, fed with our own supplies. What the gods ate I'll never know, nor do I want to know. Every other day they took one or two of my men and never brought them back. We didn't know what had happened to them until the fourth day. I saw a new guard, a man with the face of something like a boar. And on his forearm he had a tattoo of a mermaid. I remembered that tattoo. It had been on the arm of one of the crewmen that had taken away. And then I knew what they were doing to my men. I went a bit mad at that point. Roaring and screaming, bellowing for that madman to come down. I made so much noise that the old man in black, the steward as we had named him, came and stared at me and then flickered a finger for the guards to grab me. They dragged me before the lunatic on his throne and I tried to free myself and kill him. He laughed at me as I raged and swore vengeance on him, which made me even angrier until eventually I swore that I wouldn't rest until he was dead, that I, Tyrion Lannister, would come at him with everything I had. He laughed even harder at that, almost gleefully. "Another lion," he crowed, and then he giggled something about new for old and then something about lion meat being all the better for dragons. And then his mood changed and he started shouting some mad rant at the steward as I was dragged back to the dungeon. They took no more of my men after that. They left us alone. But 2 days afterwards the steward came to the dungeon. He didn't say a word, he just stared at me for a while and then left. For 2 days after that he did the same thing. On the fourth day he finally said a single word, "Lannis her." He spoke in a voice that was old and unused, as if he hadn't spoken in years. I just stared at him. "Yes," I said. "I am a Lannister. I am Tyrion Lannister." He stared back at me. Does. Casterly. Rock still, stand. I gaped at him, "I confess it." "Yes," I said, "it does." And he looked at me, and then he hung his head and left. The day after that. Well, we all woke up at the same moment, because we could all hear the voice of the lunatic. He was chanting something, chanting it in a variant of High Valyrian that set the hairs on the back of neck on end because there was something dark and terrible about it. He called to the Valyrian gods by name, in a way that made me shiver. And he was calling on them for a boon. A service. I listened to that mad voice speaking that invocation and I realized that it was a spell. We'd been working on some metal spindles we'd found hinging a box of supplies and some other pieces of metal that we'd been hoarding, and we thought that we had enough to try and force the lock when the guards weren't looking. We didn't need to. Suddenly there was a clatter down the corridor and then the steward was there. He had a key in his hand and he unlocked the door and gestured to us. "Come," he said, "come." As we surged out I looked down the corridor and I saw 2 guards on the floor to the left. They had bowls in their hands and the steward saw where I was looking. "Poison," he said, and then, "Come. You must go. He thinks he has what he needs. A spell. Come. Weapons." And then he led us all down the corridor, hobbling like the ancient old man that he was. He led us to another room, which he unlocked for us. It was filled with weapons. "Tyrion, Weapons and armor from all over Essos and West Eos. Who knows how many ships had docked at that crag in the past. My men fell on everything with glee. The steward pulled me to one side though. Spell is, a summoning. He seemed to be getting more and more voluble with time. He summons the greater Doomwing. A wild, feral, dragon. He seeks to enslave its mind. Dangerous. He needs a noble blood, sacrifice. And then he led me to the back of the room. There was a long shape on a shelf at the back there, something wrapped in a faded red piece of cloth. He took it and he gave it to me. I unwrapped it and then I saw what was in it. I almost reeled, I knew what it was at once. Brytraw. He pulled out the sword and held it tipped down to the floor. The sword of Tomentu, king of the Westerlands before the conquest. I looked at it and up into the face of the steward. He covered my hands as they gripped the sword with his own and looked back at me. I hope that you wield it with more wisdom than I did when I bore it. There were tears rolling down his face. Pray in the stone garden for me. My folly led to a punishment that was cruel. Long and cruel. Tell them. I died with honor. I wanted to ask who he was, because I only had one possible name in mind, but then he turned and walked from the room. That way, he said, gesturing to the left. Down 4 flights of stairs. Then right. Your ship is there. And then he was gone, heading right, deeper into the crag. Geryon sighed and resheathed the sword, before swallowing some more wine. We made it 2 flights down before the guards discovered us. There was a roar and a clatter of boots and they were on us. But unlike before, we were ready. And we knew that it was fight or die or worse. We fought like wild animals and they quailed at sight of our swords and our bared teeth. We slaughtered all who came before us. Down we fought. Another level. And then another. The first of the bull-headed men found us there. He killed 2 of my men with that axe of his before I could finally fall on him with my bojan at my side. My bojan got that bastard in the side with a spear and then I got him in the stomach and gutted him. The second found us in the passage that led to the ship. He was older, I think, and more experienced. He killed 3 of us and then hacked the tip of my bojan's spear off. And then I faced him. That was a hard fight, even with Brytraw in my hand. He was good, very skilled, and he shattered my shield with 1 blow and almost stunned me with a blow to my helmet with another. But then he gave me the smallest of openings, just the smallest, and I took it. Brytraw caught him in the neck and he started to bleed. He roared with fury and I caught him again. Someone got him in the leg with a spear and as he went down on one knee I got him again in the throat. But killing him made me vulnerable to a last final slash as he used his dagger. Cost me my eye. Geryon's hand went to the eye patch, a hand that shook a little. The guards broke after that. They ran. We headed to the ship and discovered that it was intact. They'd taken some supplies to feed us, but that was it. I was bleeding badly and sitting by the tiller as the crew ran like madmen to unmoor the ship and raise a small sail to get us around and out of the dock without hitting anything. The voice of the lunatic was still booming around us and then all of a sudden I saw a shape in the clouds. That dragon was there, the huge one. It was flying slowly towards the crag and as it flew it shook its head and screamed in what was perhaps pain, or anger, I don't know what. All I know is that the moment we saw it we all sprang to the sheets in panic. I was pulling on ropes as we raised sail at a speed that was very dangerous in such a small space, but we managed it. I collapsed by the tiller again, blood running down my face as watched the cliffs go past with greater and greater speed. And then 2 things happened. The first was that I saw that one of the wrecked ships at the entrance had very faded red sails and a figurehead that was a lion. The second thing was that the voice faltered and then stopped. There was a scream of pain and then a bellow of rage about traitors. I think I knew then that the steward was dead. And then there was another pause and then the lunatic started chanting again, but now there was a desperation about it, an air of panic, as if he was trying to control something with his voice alone, that things had gone horribly wrong, because he knew that we had escaped. And then there was this noise. It was as if the dragon was screaming, but then the scream changed and became a roar and then something deeper and more terrible, and then the top of the crag just vanished in a great ball of fire and flame and disintegrating rock. The noise was indescribable. It was as if the sky itself had screamed, a noise that shook the boat and sea and all of us. The ball of fire turned to smoke and then we could see the bits and pieces of debris hurtling through the air up and then down. I remember screaming orders when the first pieces splashed and roared into the water around us. Pieces of rock, dressed stone, wood and, well, it must have been bits of dragon. And a lot of it was smoking or actually still on fire. My memories get a bit hazy from then onwards. 2 men were killed or injured badly by falling debris and then I remember nothing. Apparently I collapsed. They got me to my cabin, dressed my wounds and then, whilst I lay there dead to the world, my Bojan plotted a course to get us away from that accursed place and back to the summer islands as fast as possible. They told me later that fever almost killed me not once but twice. All I remember is a lot of very bad dreams. When they got me to Alera, well, I thought that she was nothing but a cruel hallucination dreamt up by my mind. Her sister is their equivalent of a maester of healing though, and between them they nursed me back to health. As you can see. He grinned wryly at him. Tyrion sat back and blinked. Uncle Gerion's tale was astonishing. And you've been there ever since? It was a question that had to be asked. Yes. Gerion stared at his feet for a long moment and then looked up at him. I almost died, Tyrion. And for what? A sword. My Alera and my children almost lost me. That puts a lot of things into perspective. Home. What does that mean? In my case, my family. My children. So I stayed with them. And I knew that it was the right thing to do because it was then that Alera agreed to marry me. She knew that I realized where I had to be from now onwards. He paused and then smirked a little. You have more than a few cousins now. Including at least one that should have been born by now. Alarion looked intensely embarrassed by that. Father, he started to say, do you have tell? Do I have to tell people that? Yes, I do. I'm proud of it. Don't blush, boy. Your parents have sex a lot. Stop being so West AOC. Someone snorted with laughter to one side and Mance Raider walked off with Tormund Giantspan next to him muttering about Neelers and their prudish ways. However, Tyrion looked at Brightraw. That steward, his words, he couldn't have been, could he? I don't know, Tyrion Gerion said somberly. I've always wondered. Valyria was a strange place that used magic more than we might have thought. Used it in ways that we can't even imagine. The man who called himself the last Dragon Lord, who knows who he was really? Or how old? There's a theory in the Summer Islands that the doom was caused by the Dragon Lords overreaching themselves, trying to cast a magic that caused the land itself to revolt. Maybe that's true. All I know is that magic is strong there. And that all things come with a cost attached. And with that Gerion stood. Right. So what's for lunch? Chapter 28, Robb Returns 28. Chapter text. Ned. The line of wildlings never seemed to end. They came through the gate at Castle Black as a long straggling column, all ages, in all kinds of conditions. Some were wounded, some were visibly pulling themselves along through willpower alone, some strode through fast and with grins and others struggled through with grief etched on their faces. And their clothing. Some wore furs that had been stitched together with all kinds of threads, whilst others wore leather or in some cases cloth. One little group caught his eye. A tall grim-faced woman came through with a small baby in a sling around her neck and a large pack on her back. By her side trudged a small boy pulling a little sled that had a pile of furs on it. All of them looked tired, and as the woman looked around Castle Black her face worked for a moment and grief cascaded across it. And then a moment later the mask of tired reserve was back. No one else was with her. Whoever the father of the children was, there was no sign of him, and Ned wondered what the story of that family was. Makes you think, doesn't it? The words came from Gia Mormont, who had approached quietly from one side. Poor buggers. Aye, it does, Ned sighed in response. And if we don't hold the others here at the wall, then that's going to be what the people of the north look like as they flee past Moat Cailin. We stand here and we win here, because otherwise. The Lord Commander shivered a little. Aye, and don't I know it? He then sighed. At least some of my men are starting to get his head out of his ass. He jerked his head to one side and Ned could see one of his senior lieutenants, Quor in half hand, standing to one side and watching the wildlings with a peculiar look to his face. "What's up with him?" Ned asked. He used to think that the only good wildling was a dead one. "Fair enough, they've spent centuries raiding our lands and we've spent centuries tracking them down and sticking their heads on spikes. Now, for the first time, he's having to think of them as people who need to be saved from the others. Look at the poor bugger's face. He's a good man, but once he's got something in his head it's hard to shift it. He'll learn. He's learning now." Good Ned sighed. He hated to think about what must have happened to the Lord Commander in that terrible future that Robb had been sent back from. Robb had had word of a great ranging that had gone badly wrong. There was a pause and then Ned heard a horn sound from the top of the wall. He looked up and frowned. "What was that?" "Someone trying to get my attention," Gia muttered, and then he stumped off to the lift. Ned watched him go and then looked back at the flow of men and women as they came through the gate. They included another group of giants and their mammoths, and he blinked a little as one of them noticed him and said something to the others, before they all nodded their heads at him ponderously. He nodded back at them and they strode off through the south gate. What was it that they had recognized? His description? Or the Fist of Winter? He looked down at the great mace. Why had it been hidden away for so long? He had no doubts about using it now, the times required it. But when had his ancestors put it away in that room? Ned. Gia was shouting his name from the lift as he came down in it. He frowned and then walked over to it. "What's wrong?" he asked as he approached the base of the approaching lift. "There's a column of men coming in. Odd armor, from the color of it. They are bearing peace banners. Based on what some of the wildlings said, it might be the Thans." Ned paused and then nodded. "Right then. I'd best look impressive, shouldn't I?" Gia barked with laughter as he burst out of lift and then looked him up and down. "Not too shabby," he grunted. "You look a bit thin from all that riding, but you'll do." Then he looked around at Castle Black. "The Than are coming." Some stared, more than a few swore, and some gripped the pommels of their swords and looked grim. But the old bear's gaze beat down that of anyone who looked as if they might object. Ned turned to the gate on the wall and waited. And then a long double line of men strode through the gate. They were dressed in bronze armor, or what passed for armor, some with leather shirts sewn with bronze discs and scales, and some in bronze cuirasses. All had a shield and a spear, the latter with leaf-shaped heads. They were led by a tall, lean man with a shaved head and face. He wore bronze scale armor, bore a spear with an elaborate head, and after a moment Ned realized that the man had no ears, just holes in the sides of his head. Frostbite perhaps. The man raised his spear and the men came to a ragged halt. The leader of the Than looked about and then his eyes fell on Ned and he seemed to collect himself slightly before his chin came up a little and he strode over to him. As he approached, Ned could see that the man had been in a fair few fights, and then he was trying very hard not to seem nervous, especially when the man's eyes darted to the fist at his waist. "You are the Stark." The Than spoke in the old tongue, the language of the first men, something that Ned was now very familiar with after all his studies. "I am the Stark," he replied in the same language. Placing a hand on the head of the mace at his hip, he added, "I bear the Fist of Winter. I am the first Stark in many years to wield it." The Than nodded slowly, before bowing his head. "I am Styr, Magna of the Than. You lead us now. The long night is on us, as it was foretold. The others return, leading dark things. You hold the fist. Lead us, we will follow." His face worked for a moment. "We failed you," he said hoarsely. "We failed you." He stared at the earless man who looked so upset. "Failed me? I don't understand." Styr looked up at him. "Your ancestors gave my ancestors duties, long ago. Keep the peace beyond the wall. Lead the free folk in keeping watch. Beware of Hopeman." He closed his eyes for a long moment. "We failed to keep the peace and the free folk, and the Night's Watch fell into war. We failed to keep a good watch. Hopeman awoke and we did not see it." He bent and laid his spear on the ground in front of him. "My life is yours. I will take your punishment on behalf of my people. My son, Sigorn, will lead the Than afterwards." And then he knelt and bowed his head. "By the old gods," he thought, "he expects me to kill him. Instead he leant down and picked up the spear. Stand, Styr, Magna of the Thun. The Stark commands it. The lean man looked up uncertainly and then stood. Ned looked him in the eye and then handed him the spear. Much has been forgotten, south of the wall as well as north. Old alliances must be reforged. My father was murdered before I could be told much about what it means to be a Stark, but I suspect that things were buried by a weight of years before then. The Thun have remained true though. You remembered old truths. Let us build on that. Styr stared at him for a long moment and then he nodded slowly. We are sworn to the Stark and the Stark alone now. Command us. Ned nodded back and then looked at the line of men. Is this all the strength of the Thun? A part of it. More weight beyond the wall. We have stripped the valley for the first time in centuries. Supplies, forges, grinding stones, we have brought it all. He said the words with simple pride. Have your men pass on into the gift. Places have been set aside for your people, Ned said quietly. You and I must talk though. We must talk of many things with the Magna of the Night's Watch. Styr's shoulders seemed to relax just a little and then he turned and bellowed orders to his men, who started to march through the south gates. Ned looked at Gia Mormont, who had been a fascinated spectator to the whole thing. Time to dicker again, Gia. I'll fetch more ale. Puristan. The problem with old inscriptions was that they were, well, old. And they eroded, weathered down by wind and rain and sheer time. Fortunately someone had once had the presence of mind to write some of them down before they wore away completely, and now he was sitting at a desk with ramparts of books looming over him, happy as a novice given his first glimpse of the library. The books were in excellent shape, and so they should be, but he was getting a bit frustrated. There were a number of particularly pertinent inscriptions and other records, but the main fact was that the exact history of the early part of the high tower itself was, well, murky at best. No one knew who had built that lower course. Yes, there was evidence in the form of inscriptions that the first men had built the part above that Bran the Builder yet again, but again there was some ambiguity there. Bran the Builder must have been a very busy man indeed. The lower part, with that strange stone. A cough and a sniff heralded the arrival of Marwyn, who peered at the collection of books. How goes it? Slowly he muttered as he made a note on a piece of parchment. Which to say better than no progress at all. The earliest of the runes are problematic. What about the runes on the gate? Ah. He smoothed the scowl from his face. Those are peculiar. I thought at first that they were an old variation of the tongue of the first men, but there is something odd about them. Different. They remind me of carvings I have seen near the God's Eye once, many years ago. I have a theory, but it remains in its infancy and cannot yet toddle. Marwyn gave him a rather baffled look. I see, he said, sounding as if he didn't. Then he sighed. Tudyk is declining. He wants me to take over his position. Puristan looked up and grinned slyly at the other man. Too much work. A slight groan was all the answer he needed. All that faffing about, all that paperwork. Gods, he shook his head. Then he looked at Puristan again. Word of the gate at the base of the high tower is beginning to spread. It's just a matter of time before it reaches the starry September. Now it was Puristan's turn to groan. Oh joy, he said sarcastically. Remind me again about the benefits of religion. Keeps the small folk quiet and stops nobles from being greedy idiots. They're always going to be idiots. Aye, but they can at least appear to be pious. This was a good point and he nodded slightly. Well then. I'd love to see the reaction of a septon to that gate. Whatever it is, it makes bladder control difficult. He looked back at the mound of books. I wish I knew what it is. It's old, Marwyn, it's very old. Older than Old Town, older than the rest of the high tower. And whatever's on the other side of it, well, I'm glad that it's locked. There was a long silence and then the door opened on the far side of the room and Ibros walked in. A fat lad followed him, who was looking about the room with a great deal of interest. The Archmaester looked at Puristan and Marwyn and blinked more than a little. You two don't normally get on together. Driven together by research, Marwyn replied dryly. That and mutual griping about stupidity. Said Ibros. Yes, well, we all roll our eyes at that. This is Samwell Tarly. Lord Willers Tyrell sent him here to carry out some research. Research about the founding of Highgarden and Garth Greenhand. Marwyn squinted at the lad. Tarly. Any relation to Randall Tarly? I'm his eldest son and heir, the fat lad replied. And you are Maester? He's Marwyn and I am Puristan. Puristan replied with a grim smile. Then he peered at the young man. You look nothing like your father. The lad shifted from one foot to the other and then back again. Yes, he said quietly. I know. It might have been pointed out to me quite a bit. There was a brief silence and then Puristan looked back at Ibros. Why is he here? In this room. He needs access to some of the books you have. Puristan glared. I happen to be using them. Not all of them at the same time, Puristan. Surely he can read some of them when you are not looking at them. He gestured at the rampart of the books. After a long moment of thought, Puristan reluctantly conceded that he might have a point. Why Willers Tyrell, by the way, not Lord Tyrell? Lord Tyrell is on a prolonged hunting trip, Ibros said, staring at the ceiling. Lord Willers is effectively in charge of the Reach at the moment. Puristan absorbed this for a moment. Well, he said eventually, anyone has to be an improvement on Mace Tyrell. Then he looked the boy up and down. Lord Willers sent you to research the history of Highgarden and Garth Greenhand. Yes, Archmaester. Why you? Well, the lad said with a gleam of something undefinable in his eyes, I do have some experience of finding information for Lord Willers Tyrell. And things. Otherbane, for example. They all stared at him. Otherbane. The weapon of the Gardener Kings. The weapon that hasn't been seen since the Field of Fire. Marwyn was openly staring. Yes, Tarly said with a hint of defiance. Then he pulled out a piece of parchment. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an initial list of books I'd like to take a look at. Puristan peered at the list. It was a very long one. It was possible that the lad might have a little potential. Cat. She pattered on next to noiseless feet along the corridor and then very carefully peered around the corner. Arya had not diverted from her course at all and was indeed headed to her room. Her shoulders were slumped and Kat's heart ached for her daughter. She looked as if she was deeply sad and Kat knew that it was her fault. As a result, she had been avoiding her own mother all day and now Kat had had enough. She waited until Arya and Nymeria entered the room and then she strode in behind them and closed the door. Arya looked at her in shock, followed by some sullenness. Hello, mother. Arya, sit down. I need to talk to you. Her second daughter rolled her eyes, but obediently sat on her bed, with Nymeria sitting next to her. Good, said Kat as she sat on the other side of the bed. Now Arya, I need to talk to you. Mother, if this is about the scepter again. No, this is about the other matter. This is about you saying that you and Bran are a warg. The brows came down into a stubborn scowl and her daughter crossed her arms. What about it? Arya, this is important. And, this is something that I am having trouble with. I know that the old gods have spoken through your father, yes, I know, and Jon. I believe in the Seven, but I also believe in the old gods. I have to, too much has happened. You claiming to be a warg is important. I know that you believe it. So help me to believe it. I want you to prove it to me. There. The words were said. She couldn't believe that she had said them, given her upbringing. Arya was directing a very odd look at her, a look that somehow combined utter disbelief with wild hope. You want me to show you how I walk? She swallowed. That part of her mind that said that this was all unnatural was screaming at her. Yes. Her daughter searched her face with her eyes, before making an eep noise of excitement and then scooting back to that she was pressed against her pillows. This will take a little while, she said quietly. I've showed Bran. I'll show you. Mother, my eyes will turn white. And I'll be in Nymeria. You need to ask me to do things through her. I mean that I'll be in her, but you need to talk to her to give me orders. Does that make any sense? She ran her daughter's words through her head, winced a little but then nodded. Arya's eyes searched her face again, her own face more serious than she had ever seen it, and then she closed her eyes. A long moment of silence followed and Kat could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Part of her mind was still pointing out that this was blasphemy, whilst another part of her remembered the red fire in Ned's eyes on the night of the direwolf. On and on that silence went, and just as she was starting to wonder what was happening, Arya's eyes suddenly flickered open. They were white, not the white of the roll of an eye, but an absolute white that almost glowed. Kat's hands flew to her mouth almost without her thinking about it, and then she noticed that Nymeria was standing to one side, her head tilted to one side. She huffed a little and leapt down to the floor, where she sat. Kat peered at the little direwolf, her hands gripping her knees. "Arya." Nymeria nodded and then panted happily. Kat looked at Arya for a moment and shuddered a little at those white eyes, before looking back at Nymeria, her mind whirring. "Arya, what's 4 plus 3? The direwolf huffed again, before barking 7 times. 10 minus 5. 5 barks. Raise 2 of your paws." A front right and back left paw was raised. "It's true," she muttered, utterly stunned. "It's true. You are a warg." Nymeria darted forwards and licked her hand, before doing back and sitting on her haunches. Then she looked at Arya. Kat also looked at her daughter, and then she gasped as the whiteness faded from Arya's eyes, returning to their natural grey. "Are you all right, mother?" Arya asked the question quietly, almost fearfully. "It's just me, and Nymeria, I mean warging. I've read about it, Starks did it in the old days, there are statues in the crypts, and it's natural, mother, it's not unnatural, and you're staring at me and I don't know what else to say." And Kat shut her daughter up the best way that she knew, by hugging her. "You are my daughter," she said fiercely, as Arya squeaked and then melted into her embrace. "My daughter the warg." And then she wondered what Ned would say. It would not matter to him, she knew. Arya would always be Arya. Gendry. The long line of men on horses stretched ahead of him, and he winced a little as he tried to find a new way of seating himself on the saddle that didn't hurt. This wasn't his first time on a horse. He'd travelled on business a few times for Master Mart. He'd quite enjoyed it at the time. Of course he was now facing a longer trip. A much longer trip. He'd heard about saddle sores from some of the other men. He wasn't looking forwards to finding out exactly what they were like. His new clothes were taking some getting used to as well. They weren't as nice as the clothes that Shireen and the others were wearing, but they were still better quality than he had ever worn before. And they were warm. It was colder than King's Landing here. Colder, but oddly, cleaner. Nicer. The smells were better. He'd lived all his life with the stench of the city in his nostrils. White Harbour had been so clean. And now the road was clean as well. A rider galloped past him and he watched him go carefully. Lord Stannis had been very clear, "Stay at the back of the column, watch the men around you and be wary. There's some here who wish you ill. You can be sure of that." It all made him uneasy, and he'd taken to watching everyone carefully. Especially the man in red cloaks. Lannister guards. He'd already had one good reason to be cautious. He'd found his horse to be a bit skittish that morning. Checking every part of the saddle, he'd found out why a small caltrop placed under the saddle. If he'd mounted his horse, then a prong would have maddened it beyond belief. Lord Stannis had seen it when he surreptitiously shown him and ground his teeth a bit. "Well spotted," he had told him. "Keep being careful. I'll set a good man to watch you." The good man in question was a knight, Sir Jorah Mormont. A knight, or the northern equivalent. He was riding next to him now, a tall and rather solemn man with thinning hair. He'd seen him sparring with father in White Harbour. Father? It was still so strange to think that his father was actually His Grace the King of the Seven Kingdoms. Robert, the first of his name. It still made him feel strange inside. He'd seen his half-brothers and sister once or twice. They were very blonde, very much like their mother. Prince Joffrey, from what the guards and servants had said, was a right little shit, but Prince Tommen and Princess Myrcella were said to be very nice. Kind even, although the little boy was oddly fixated with cats. And then there was the Queen. She was beautiful, if cold. Blonde and cold, like gold made flesh. She was traveling in a carriage that seemed to annoy her a lot. There had been talk of a wheelhouse, but on a trial run the wheels had all fallen off after a mile. He's also seen the sworn sword, or bodyguard, or whatever the seven hells it was, to Prince Joffrey. Sander Clegane was large, had a fascinating helm in the shape of a dog and was horribly scarred on one side of his face. He was, in a word, intimidating. And someone to avoid. The man was dangerous. He wasn't sure why, but he avoided him as a result. They rode a long way that day. A long and painful way by the end. He ached in all kinds of places that he'd rather not think about, and then there was the chafing. But eventually they came to a stout keep ruled by a large man with Mandalay blood and his doting wife and 7, God's almighty, 7, children. Rhys Greensnow was some descendant of a Mandalay bastard perhaps, and had had plenty of warning of the arrival of the king and his huge group, and probably coin from White Harbour to help with the cost of hosting them all. There was already a couple of beef carcasses being roasted as they arrived, and as the king boomed his pleasure at the welcome, whilst the queen sniffed and looked chilly. As everyone scattered to their various quarters, some inside the keep and some in the nearby, Gendry looked about, jiggled his legs and wondered if his balls would ever forgive him for the ordeal that they had just gone through. They'd have to. It was another half a day to the ferry over the White Knife and then the road that joined up with the King's Road, or so people said. Ser Jorah slapped his shoulder, nodded at him and then walked off to join his all-but-wife Lyra. Hearing the puff-huff of a bellows in the distance, he looked over to one side. Yes, there was a smithy there, and before he knew it his legs had led him there. The blacksmith was a short burly man with enormous black eyebrows and a surprisingly deft swing of the hammer. His assistant, who was pumping the bellows of the forge every now and then, was cut from the same cloth and was obviously his son, although by the way that the younger man was wiping his forehead and shivering, he was also ill. Both looked at him briefly as he approached but said nothing as he folded his arms and watched. The blacksmith was making a sword, and not a bad one, but as the steel started to be shaped, Gendry could see that the younger man was starting to shiver again, this time more violently. He pulled his jerkin off and strode over to the bellows, placing his saddlebags to one side. "Give over, I'll take it." The blacksmith's son peered at him. "Can you handle a bellows?" "I could at King's Landing. I can do the same here." The two northern men looked at him, then at each other, and then the older one shrugged. "Get to bed, John. That wife of yours will never forgive me if you fall over in the forge. You're not well." The younger one opened his mouth as if to argue, before shivering again and then relinquishing the bellows, before taking off his leather apron, hanging it neatly up, looking around the smithy and then walking off. Gendry nodded and then pumped the bellows hard to get the temperature up a little, as it did not look quite right. This seemed to please the blacksmith, if a grunt and slight nod meant what he thought, who then reheated the sword before pounding on it again. "Apprentice." "Aye. To anyone good?" "Master Martin, the Street of Steel in King's Landing." "Passing though?" "I'm with the King's party, on the way to Winterfell." A pause. "You heard the bellows then?" "Aye." The sword was coming together nicely now, the steel just the right color, and Gendry watched as it was shaped to just the right manner before being quenched in the right bucket. The blacksmith looked up. "You here to just pump the bellows or work?" "I can take work if it allows me to do my own bit." "What are you working on?" He pumped the bellows hard for a moment and then reached for his saddlebags. He didn't have much, but he had enough to start making two objects in White Harbour. One was a helmet in the shape of a stag's head, the practical kind, mind. The other was a simple helmet with a faceplate. Something that didn't make him stand out. He pulled them both out and handed them over. The blacksmith turned each over in his hands, inspecting them carefully as Gendry pumped the bellows every now and then, as well as adding coal in the right grill. "This is good work." "Both of them." "Why a stag though?" For my father. He wears Baratheon colors." "Oh I. Shrewd eyes searched his face. "There's 2 swords and 5 knives that need making over there. Finish them and you can work on whatever you like." Gendry thought about it and then nodded, before reaching for a leather apron. "Best to hide in plain sight for a while." Ed Muir. He found father in his solar, sitting at his desk and staring at a map of Westeros on the wall opposite. Father was having one of his good days, which tended to outnumber the bad days at the moment, although as Maester Vimen had warned him, there was no guarantee that this would continue. As he closed the door, father looked up and smiled slightly. "You watched them for a long time from the ramparts?" Ed Muir nodded slightly and then sat down. Odd to see Uncle Brindon so changed. And that woman he was with. Brian of Tarth. Daughter of the Even Star. Father shook his head slightly. I will write to him of this. He would be proud of her. He nodded. And the Green Man. I don't know what to say about him. Sir Duncan the Tall. Father shook his head. I remember him from when I was younger. The noblest man the Kingsguard has ever had. I thought that he was long dead. But then there is something about being the Green Man that can't be explained. Father sighed and then looked at the map again. I never thought that I would see the day that the Green Men went forth from the Isle of Faces again. It was foretold a long time ago. The thought of living in a time of prophecy is disturbing. He looked at Edmure and sighed again. Edmure, I do not know how long I have left. Vimen says that I might or might not recover from this wasting sickness. Given what has happened, I feel that I cannot take the chance of presuming that I'll get better. You must prepare to succeed me, perhaps sooner than you might have liked. And there's a lot you need to know. I know, Father, he groaned. Better skills at placing men in battle for a start. High Heart could have been nasty. That's one thing, Father said heavily. But there's something more important. Tullys have ruled the Riverlands since Egon's conquest. What is not widely known is that the coming of Egon was predicted. The Green Man at the time sent word to our ancestor Edwin Tully to come and meet him on the Isle of Faces. It was a time of great tension. Harin the Black was looting everything that wasn't nailed down in the Riverlands and even his own Iron Islands to build Harrenhal. He even broke the old agreement not to bother the Isle of Faces, or at least he tried to. He sent 3 ships filled with men with axes to chop down the weirwood trees there. They all vanished, never to be seen again. The Green Man of that time warned him never to try again. And also told him that even stone could burn. He didn't listen, and we all know what happened next. Balerion the Black Dread happened to him, Edmure muttered with ice sliding up and down his spine for a moment. And Harrenhal burned. Yes. Edwin Tully was told by the Green Man what would happen. The Green Man was his uncle. He sat up at this. Green men have been Tullys. Green men have come from all over the place. All over Westeros. Our ancestors have walked on the Isle of Faces. It must always be protected. There was an agreement. And Edwin Tully made 2 trips there. One in which he was warned about the arrival of the Targaryens. And one in which he was warned about what would happen next. The warning was for his descendants. I suspect that the warning was for us. It came in 3 parts. One was that there would never be any more Valyrian steel, that the secret of making it had been lost. One was that another Valyrian secret would be lost, the one that would allow brother to marry sister and not have deformed or mad offspring. We both know how that ended up. The Mad King, Edmure said through suddenly very dry lips. And the third. That the dragon lore of the Targaryens would one day fade. That the dragons would vanish. But that one day they would be needed again. On a day when fish were black on the Isle of Faces. And with that Father leant back and stared at Edmure with one eyebrow raised. He stared back at Father for a long moment and then the ice reappeared on his spine. Wait, Uncle Brindon was on the Isle of Faces. The Blackfish was there. Yes. The day that your uncle named himself the Blackfish I was angry and thought nothing of it. Then I eventually remembered what my own father had told me of that long ago meeting on the Isle of Faces. And I looked rather like you do now. Edmure swallowed and then ran a hand over his face. The implications were disturbing. Why would dragons be needed now? We both know why. You heard the call as loudly as I did. The others come. I suspect that they do. He sat there for a long moment, all kinds of thoughts and emotions rolling through him. Then, what must we do? Word has come from the Citadel that the Maesters are debating whether or not a long winter is coming. Given everything else, all this talk of the others, we must assume that it will be a second long winter. Father's nostrils flared for a moment. We face legends. Perhaps this is a time of legends. We need to be worthy of such a time, Edmure. Legends. He did not feel as if that word fitted him. Could ever fit him. But he needed to try and rise to the challenge. Any word of the choices I face in marriage. Father chuckled slightly. I am making a list. No phrase of course, even though Walder Free has always sent me the names of those of his daughters that are unmarried at the moment. What about Mary Ann Vance or Rosalind Mallister? Ed Muir felt his cheeks heat up for a moment. I've met Rosalind Mallister before. She's very pretty. Mary Ann Vance is half free, father. But not all free. The Vances are loyal to Riverrun. No Brackens or Blackwood's a good idea, father. Pick a girl from one family and the other would scream in protest. That said, the two houses have both done a lot to mend their relations recently. That great oath of theirs, as well as them both defending Raventree Hall, well, I have to say that they are both striving mightily to do the right thing. We cannot do anything that threatens their fragile truce. Ed Muir muttered. Perhaps a meeting with Lord Mallister soon then. Father nodded. Soon. In the meantime we need to work out what to do with our mad Blackfoot guest. He sighed, leant back in his chair and passed a hand over his face. I believe in the Seven, but he is a disgrace to them. He places himself first, that much is evident. He is a fool. What does Vimen say about him? That he's a drooling madman now. He cannot explain his blindness. No one can. You were there, can you explain it? He thought back to that night and then he shook his head. No. The green man took his sight just with his words. I cannot explain it. Father just looked at him. And since he went mad and blind, the number of attacks and unrest by the faith militant have diminished. He seems to have been behind so much of it. So what do we do with him? That was a good point. He rubbed his chin. The man is mad. He has committed such crimes, but can we execute him now? If I could, I'd throw him off the ramparts and into the waters below, and good riddance to very bad rubbish. But I think that we must tread most carefully on this matter. I have sent a raven to the small council at King's Landing asking what to do with the wretched man. The last thing we want is the High Septon to be critical. Ed Muir pulled a face as he thought this through, before nodding. I understand, father. At least he's stopped befooling himself. Father shuddered a little and then they both looked at the tap on the door. It was Vimen, who was holding a letter in one hand, which he held out as he approached father's desk. I beg your pardon, my lord, but a merchant from Essos arrived bearing this. The seals on it are interesting. Father took the letter with a frown and peered at it carefully, his frown deepening as he looked at the wax seals that had been pressed into the front of it. He said eventually. Interesting. Then he opened it. Sit, Vimen. Tell me of this merchant. His name is Tan, my lord, from Myr. He says that he was headed to first Teosh and then King's Landing on business when he came upon the Golden Company, 3 of whom heard about him and then asked him to pass on that letter when he arrived in West Eos. He's quite away from King's Landing, father muttered as he opened the letter carefully, unfolded it and then read it. Then he frowned mightily and reread it, before putting it down and steepling his fingers under his nose for a moment. How to deal with this, he half whispered. How indeed? Father. Ed Muir prompted carefully. What? Oh, Ed Muir. It seems that the call wasn't just heard in the ranks of the Company of the Rose. Other exiles heard it too. And they have asked about the possibility of a pardon and a return from exile. Who? Ed Muir asked. Members of the Golden Company, obviously. They claim to be, well, members of Houses Strong, Lothston and, well, Mud. Ed Muir stared at him and then he reached for the letter and stared at the seals. My gods, he said eventually. Can it be true? I do not know. But the seals are right. Seals can be forged. They heard the call, they write the words of it. They might be lying. Father muttered. But the king and the hand must know of this at once. Think about the implications. Ed Muir leant back in his chair. Vimen was as white as a sheet in his own seat. Finally he looked up. The ripples are spreading, father. And the Golden Company is likely broken. Ed. Riding with women was interesting. Well, not too much riding with them, more in company with them. Sort of. Craster had 2 horses of his own, as well as a cart, and Jen had crammed a lot of supplies as well as all of her fellow wives into it. Craster's keep was no more, and the funeral pyre had been a great one. Well, no matter. He'd thrown the dismembered pieces of the bloody man into the growing inferno himself, and good riddance to him. The thought of anyone at all ever worshipping those things was wrong. The further south they'd rode, the more they had seen evidence that the wildlings were on the move, and in huge numbers. In places the trees had been hacked down to allow the passage of what, from the ruts, might have been carts. And here and there was the occasional sign of a pyre, with charred bones visible. People had died nearby, and the wildlings had been burning them. Had to burn them. Craster's wives had not been the burden that some had thought. They were all wildlings, but they had been grateful to them for killing their husband. The whole thing made his skin crawl. They'd stripped the keep bare of food and other supplies before it had been burned, and the amounts had been startling. As the wall loomed ever closer, he noticed Sir Jeremy staring at the ground and the debris that some of the wildlings had left behind in their passage south. "They're all moving," Sir Jeremy muttered. "All of them." He reined in quickly, dismounted, grabbed something off the ground, and then remounted and spurred up to rejoin them as he pored over whatever it was, before finally holding it up. "Is that bronze?" Ed asked as he peered at it. "Aye, Toilette, it is. Bit of bronze armor unless I miss my guess." "Then make, too." A lot of heads turned to stare at him, not least Craster's head ex-wife. "Then. Truly." Sir Jeremy hefted it and then tossed it carefully at her. "Then." The woman caught it and then looked at it intently, as one of the other women took the reins for the cart off her. "Fuck me," she said in a stunned tone of voice. "Then. I never thought I'd see them this far south." She hefted it carefully and then looked at Sir Jeremy. "If the Thun have come south to the wall, then that means that a storm is coming indeed. The others have come, and there is a saying amongst us that if the Thun ever go south to follow the Stark, then another long winter will come." There was a pause amongst the men of the Night's Watch as they looked at each other for a moment. Then Sir Jeremy finally admitted, "Before we left on our mission north of the wall, word had it that Ned Stark was riding for Castle Black." Jen stared at him and then at them all with a pale face, before looking back at the wall. "Then if the Stark has the Thun behind him to the south of the wall, then the second long winter comes." They rode on in silence after that, until the wall loomed above them and the gate to Castle Black could be seen in the distance. There was a long line of wildlings passing through the tunnel through the wall, and as they looked at that line, Ed saw Sir Jeremy's jaw set and the knuckles of his hands whiten on the reins for a long moment, before he finally sighed and shook his head a little. "It has to be done," he heard the older man mutter. "It has to be." Ed could see Dewen digging in his furs for his horn, which he lifted to his lips and used to blow a single, long, dolorous blast that told those on the wall that rangers of the Night's Watch approached. A tiny figure far, far above waved at them, and he sighed in relief as they approached the tunnel and then rode through. Craster's wives on the other hand seemed to be an odd mixture of relieved at being south of the wall and fearful at being at the heart of the Night's Watch. They were also astonished to see the huge direwolf sitting at the base of the stairs, next to a bearded man with long hair tied back. He was dressed in fine but functional dark leathers, and by the fact that the Lord Commander was next to him and talking quietly, he must have been important. Then he blinked a little. There were Stark banners flying here and there. Was that Lord Stark? Sir Jeremy dismounted and nodded to the two men in front of him. "Lord Commander," he muttered. "Lord Stark." Sir Jeremy the Old Bear replied. "Interesting company you keep." "Craster's wives," the ranger replied. "Craster's keep is no more, the man is dead. They seek passage south beyond the wall to be safe." Gia Mormont's eyebrows flew up and down for a moment, before he scowled in thought. "Best send them on then. We need to hear your report. I'll have to make it with Toilette here." Ed stared at Sir Jeremy with something close to horror. "Me? You?" Something close to a smirk crossed his face. "Toilette here has killed another." Everyone within earshot of this lifted their head and stared at him as his cheeks flamed. "Aye," he said faintly. "I did." The Lord Commander of the Night's Watch looked him up and down before tilting his head to one side. "Well, let's hear this tale of yours." Lord Stark and the Lord Commander, with the direwolf loping ahead of them, led them all up the stairs to the Lord Commander's solar. There they found a man dressed in bronze armor talking to Maester Eamon in what sounded like the language of the first men. The first thing that he noticed was that the man in bronze had no ears. The second was that Maester Eamon's eyes were, well, could he see? When the Maester then turned to look at them, he almost walked into Sir Jeremy's side, so quickly did that other man stop in his tracks. Maester Eamon. Sir Jeremy. And young Tolette. I see that you have returned from your mission. And yes, I can see. His eyes twinkled with joy for a moment. A gift from the old gods, thanks to Lord Stark. Then he sobered a little. This is Styr, Magna of the Thun. He speaks the old tongue of the first men. The earless man nodded at them and seemed to be about to take his leave when Lord Stark sat next to him, gestured with one hand and said something in the language of the first men. Styr looked a bit shocked and then looked at Ed. I told him that you had killed what the Thun call a White Walker. We must hear your tale at once. Ed found himself coloring a little. This was going to be embarrassing, the tale of how he fell on his ass and stabbed blindly at what many had thought to be a myth. Well. At least they could speak of Craster's fate. That still cheered him up a little. Tyrion. The night fort was not a place where he thought he could sleep easily, but so much had happened that he slept like a log that night. A guard schedule had been worked out, but he was not on it much to his relief. No, he slept hard until dawn, when he was woken by Pod, who had a jaw-cracking yawn and a bowl of hot porridge. As the others woke and he ate his porridge, he looked about the building they were in again. It had been a great hall once. He wondered how much work it would take to get it repaired again. And then he worried about what kind of state the crypts were in. Much to his surprise, the letter written by Tywin Lannister did not astonish his uncle as much as it had astonished him. Instead, Geryon had read it carefully, mulled it over, given it to his frowning son and then raised his eyebrows at him. They had then had a silent conversation, conducted entirely in eyebrows and lip quirks. Uncle Geryon had a very close connection with his son. You don't seem that surprised, Tyrion said eventually. Uncle, were you following us or coming here anyway? Geryon smiled slightly at him. Both. I'll explain later. He peered at his uncle. See that you do, uncle, see that you do. Now we have some crypts to explore. It wasn't that simple, of course. First they had to deal with the Wilderling prisoners, who were the subject of a quarrel between Alisa Thorne and Mance Rayder that was only resolved by an annoyed Robb Stark, who reminded them both that Lord Stark had given orders that the Wildlings be allowed to settle in the Gift before the winter started, and that Rayder had custody of them, whilst also reminding them of the laws south of the Wall. There had been a bite and snap of command in the voice of the young Stark that had made everyone stare at him and all but stand at attention, especially Rayder's good sister. There it was again, that nagging other feeling he had about the boy. He seemed older than his years at times. Was that due to the situation here at the Wall? Or the fact that the North was a harsher place? Or something else? He didn't know. Fortunately, Stark had spoken enough sense to get through to Thorne. And Rayder then agreed to let the prisoners work on the night fort for a week as a penance before going south. And after that they could finally start to search the night fort. The lower levels of the castle were not like the upper levels. He could tell quite quickly that the night fort was mostly built on the bones of past night forts. And his fears about the crypts were unfounded. They weren't flooded or ruined, in fact they were well drained and sturdy. The place where past Lord Commanders of the Night's Watch were buried was a somber place. Stairs led down to a chamber with passageways leading off to the right and left. Down each passageway were chambers hacked out of the bedrock, with slots in the wall for the dead. Stone box after stone box lay in those slots. They burned their dead from the start. Theon Greyjoy asked the question as he peered at the slots in one room with the light of a burning brand. Those boxes are too small for bones, other than ashes of bones. So it would seem, Tyrion replied as his heart sank. Surely Tywin Lannister would have been buried in a similar fashion, cremated and then the ashes placed in a box. But then why would he write to me and say to seek out his grave? Let us keep searching. The rooms are laid out in sequence, Robb Stark pointed out. The earliest Lord Commanders first, the later ones further up. Let's search the farthest room. This was a good idea, and it was indeed there that they found what they were looking for. Tywin Lannister's tomb, if it could be called that, was a box in a slot in the wall, but a larger slot than they had seen before, because there was another stone box next to it. Oddly enough, it was at just the right height for Tyrion to inspect it. And it had a small carving at the end. One of the Lannister lion. He traced the symbol with a trembling finger, and then he clenched his fingers into a fist. The others behind him were all silent. After a long moment he reached out and pulled on the end of the stone box. Stone ground on stone, and he panted a little as the box slowly came free, and then Uncle Jerion was next to him, adding his strength. The box slid out with greater speed, and then Illyrian was there to one side, helping as well. They laid the stone box on the ground once it was free. It was about 4 feet long, a foot wide and a foot deep, with a lid that seemed to slide along its long axis. He peered at it and swallowed. "Let's see what's in this." The lid slid to one side with the greatest of reluctance, and by the time it was off he was panting with exertion a little as he helped to lay it down. Only then did he look in the box. Inside was an old black cloak. Oh wait, there was something under the cloak, a set of shapes wrapped in oilcloth. His mouth was dry suddenly, and he moved the cloak to one side. There were 3 things in there. One was long, about as long as his arm, perhaps a bit longer. The second was smaller, and the third a lot smaller, small and square. He reached for the smallest one first. It was carefully stitched closed, but his knife soon opened it. Inside was another piece of oilskin, also stitched closed, and inside that was a leather envelope. There was a name stitched onto it. His. "This kind of thing always leaves me feeling a bit lightheaded," he muttered as he showed it to his uncle with a shaking hand. "He knew I'd be here. He saw me. Dreamt me. Whatever the right word is." Jerion looked at him carefully. "You'd best open it," he said eventually, with a note of something that Tyrion couldn't quite place in his voice. "We need to know what he wrote." He opened it carefully. Yes, inside was a letter, the writing thin and spidery, the script of a very old man. "My dear Tyrion. Again, forgive my informality. This will be the last thing I ever write, as I am now dying. It is not something I am enjoying very much, so please excuse my curtness. You stand next to my ashes. You know why brothers of the Night's Watch are burnt. Or you will soon anyway. There are 2 packages in the box that I ordered to be buried next to my ashes. The first contains an axe. The second contains 2 daggers. All are yours. I took them from a forgotten vault in Casterly Rock, a place forgotten about since almost the time of Lan the Clever. Our ancestors were fools who eventually grew arrogant. They forgot because it did not fit their version of the world, where they were more important than anyone else. The light fades, or perhaps it is my eyes. There is more you must know. The axe is Rocktooth, the ancestral weapon of the Westerlands, the weapon that Lan the Clever himself wielded against the others when he fought side by side with the then Stark of Winterfell. Use it wisely and with pride, it's older than Lan himself. The daggers were also used by Lan. There were various names for them, including Lan's ears and Lan's whiskers, but their original name, according to the runes on them, were the warnings. Heed what they tell you. There is a room deeper in the crypts that you now need to find. Take the Stark who looks a bit like a Tully with you. And good luck, my boy." It was signed Tyrion Lannister, and he felt more than a little faint as he handed the letter to his uncle, who read it with a look of the utmost seriousness. "He left them for you," Jerion said eventually with a slight smile. "You should claim them." His hands were trembling as he cut the stitches on the other 2 oilskin packages. The long one first. Inside was an axe. It was quite possibly the oldest thing he'd ever seen, a weapon ancient beyond words. It had an odd sheen to it, one that was familiar. "Sky metal," he muttered as he traced a finger over it. "And, is that obsidian in the middle of it?" It certainly looked like it. It might have been made by the same man who forged the Fist of Winter. Its handle was made from wood, filigreed with threads of more sky metal, and there was obsidian set at the end of the handle as well as 2 places in the blade. For some reason he didn't want to pick it up. If he did so, Rocktooth was his, in a way that could never be taken back. He would no longer be studying the past would become a part of his present. "If I take it, Father will never forgive me. I'd have something that he'd want." "Your father wants bright ore, and he'll never have that. Take it, Tyrion." Shouldn't there be thunder at this moment? Ache, that's for Durandans and the Baratheons that followed them. Tyrion, this is your moment. Take it. He reached out with those treacherously trembling hands and picked the axe up. It wasn't as heavy as he had thought it would be, and he hefted it for a moment. Nothing crashed overhead, there was no boom of the earth trembling beneath his feet, it was all a bit anticlimactic. I'll need something to carry this in, he muttered. A scabbard on my back perhaps. I'll make something for you, my lord, Pod muttered behind him. I can stitch leather. Tyrion grinned at the boy for a moment and then cut open the other package. Yes, there were 2 daggers in it, both made from the same metal and both with wood handles. Gods, they were old. I'll need scabbards for these as well, he muttered as he ran his hands over them and noted the runes on the surface of the blades. He'd need to translate them carefully. They're old. He picked them both up carefully and thrust them equally carefully into his belt, before standing and looking around with Rocktooth in his left hand. Let's keep looking, there's supposed to be another place in here. Another room. It did not take long to find it. There was another passageway, a long and thin one that was again carved out of the living rock. And at the end was a door. There was dirt and rubbish piled against the bottom of it, but halfway up it was a lock, an ancient thing with a seal pressed from some kind of red wax that covered it. Tyrion stared at it in confusion. Surely wax would have eventually crumbled to pieces after all that time. That's the seal of the old kings in the north, Robb Stark muttered in a shocked voice. The Great Seal of Winter. Father's got it in a box somewhere in his solar. The last time it was used was after Torrhen Stark bent the knee to Aegon the Conqueror. He peered at it again. Yes, the seal was festooned with wolves. How very Starkish, if such a word existed. Why would a room in the Night Fort be sealed off with the symbol of the old kings in the north? Sir Alisa, can you shed any light on this? The sour-faced man shook his head, an expression of puzzled shock on his face. There's nothing in the histories that I've read about this place, he muttered. Nor less about the Stark kings of old leaving their sign on the place. He walked up and peered at it closely, before tugging on the hasp. It seemed to be quite strong even after all these years. A good lock, that. Odd. It's bloody ancient. Something tickled at the back of Tyrion's mind for an instant. I wonder. Tyrk Lannister told us to come with a Stark and mentioned that it should be the one that looked like a Tully. Robb Stark, would you mind inspecting the seal? The heir to Winterfell looked at him in bafflement. Why? Oh, just a feeling I have. Robb Stark looked at his friends, shrugged in bafflement and then walked up to the lock. He inspected it carefully and then reached out and tugged at the hasp, which snapped instantly like a rotten twig, before the entire thing crumbled like dust into his hands. They all stared at the debris in his hands. Good God, someone said faintly, and after a moment Tyrion realized that it had been him. Well now, I think that we were meant to open this door. They had to dig the debris clear from the floor in front of it to make room for Robb and Jon Stark to both pull the door open. It shrieked as it opened and the noise set the hairs on the back of his neck on end in an instant. And as the door came open, a stench of decay reached them, one strong enough to make him pull a face. What in the name of all the gods is that? Theon Greyjoy gasped as he all but retched. Foul air and more. Give it a moment to pass, Tyrion replied. Watch the torches carefully. If they start to gutter, then the air is too foul to breathe. They waited a long moment until the stench diminished a little. Only then did they enter. Beyond the door lay a large room. It was dominated by a huge chair, almost a throne, that stood with its back to the far wall. And there were bones everywhere, strewn all over the place. There were rusted knives on the floor amongst the bones, and in one corner, next to a pile of rubble, there was what might have been the remains of a cauldron. These are human, a horrified Sir Alisa Thorne muttered as he looked about. They are all human bones. Gods, what happened here? A massacre. Tyrion mused as he looked at bones himself. No, the door was shut. Why seal the door? Are those marks on the bones from fighting? Nay, Mance Rayder muttered as he lifted one blackened bone and peered at it. This looks as if it's been flensed. Someone butchered this poor bugger. Why? Theon Greyjoy asked, his face pale and wan. To eat him, Boy Thorne replied as he walked about the room and inspected the bones with distaste. This is the lair of a cannibal. The Greyjoy lad turned even paler but did not throw up. It seemed to be a close run thing though. One of the bodies seemed to be more intact than the others, if barely. It was a huddle of bones in a tattered black robe at the foot of the chair, or whatever it was. As he drew closer to the thing, Tyrion could see runes on the sides of it, and carvings as well. "This is odd," Thorn muttered as he peered at the skull of the body in the cloak. "There's finger bones threaded together with wire on this one's head." There was indeed. He peered at it, and then light dawned. A crown of bones. He was crowned with bones. How odd. He looked around again and then made another connection. He might have been the one who cooked here. Could this be the Rat King? The others stared and then there was a collective shrug. "Might be," Jon Stark muttered. "These bones have been here for centuries. It's an ancient legend though." "Yes, but one based on something at least," Tyrion replied as he looked about again. "Someone killed men here and then ate at least some of them. And there are many dark legends of this place. Perhaps this is the place that spawned the legends." Val reached down and lifted a large and very corroded axe. "Wasn't there a tale of a man called Mad Axe?" Thorn muttered. He was staring at the pile of debris in the corner. "Is that a hole in the ceiling there?" A number of the others walked over and looked up at it. "I think it is, yes," Robb Stark muttered. "It heads upwards." "We need a volunteer," Tyrion said brightly, only to get some very dirty looks sent his way. He sighed and thought very hard, calling up the memory of what he had seen so far of the night fort. "Very well then, can someone go back out of here, via the passageways we entered, and get to the kitchens? I think that we are currently under the northwest corner of the kitchens." "Come on then, Giantsman," Thorn said after a long moment. "Let's be at it." The red-bearded man looked at the man of the Night's Watch as he walked away and then looked back at Rhaegar, who nodded. "My life is getting odder by the minute," Tormund Giantsman muttered, but followed the receding figure of the man in black. As they waited, Tyrion turned his attention to the throne, because that was what it most resembled, in front of them all. It was carved of granite, or something close to it, and the more he looked at it the more he realized that this was ancient, even for the north. There were men, or the shapes of men, carved on one side, based on what light his brand was able to direct at it. And some kind of tree. And then an animal of some kind. The thing was filthy as well as ancient. But it was the runes that attracted his attention. They were of an ancient kind, proving how old the object was. He peered at them quizzically for long minutes as the others wandered about and expressed disgust at what they found in places. Some of the runes he could read. Others he could not. The one he definitely could read was the most obvious one. "Stark." Two heads turned to him. "What?" Robb Stark muttered. "Which of us do you need?" "No," he replied, "that's what it says at the top of this thing. It says Stark there. This is old, very, very old." He went back to reading what he could of the runes, and the more he read the more confused he became. Eventually he looked about for an old sword and used it to scrape away at the base of the chair, where the tops of other runes could just about be seen. "This," he panted as he pulled the filthy debris away, "is also odd." "Why, odd?" Rhaegar asked. He too was looking at the runes. "Wait. I think I know what that part says. Throne of Winter." "Nay," Jon Stark broke in. "The Throne of Winter's at Winterfell." "I know, I've seen it," Tyrion replied. "But that's not as old as this is. I think that this might be the original Throne of Winter, or at least the first such object. But why seal it away? These runes are peculiar. They are older than anything I've ever seen. Some of the words are familiar and others are archaic." It was at this point that they heard a very odd noise in the far distance. It sounded like a mammoth being strangled in the far distance, or something like that, and everyone looked about wildly, until Robb Stark walked over to the hole in the ceiling and squinted up at it. After a moment there was a sound like stone scraping on stone and eventually a faint light shone down from above, followed by a voice. "Is that you, young wolf?" "Tormund." "Aye, me and this stone-faced crow, as well as some of the others. We're in the kitchens, or under them at least. Storage room underneath another storage room. There was a great stone slab over the hole leading down here. Sealed off probably." Might be that someone knew that something was wrong down there and stuck that slab over it all. Took 5 of us to move it. Anything written on the slab? There was a moment of muttering and then the voice of Sir Alistair Thorne said, yes, not to move it on orders of the Lord Commander. I think that this is the place where so many dark legends of the Night Fort were born, Tyrion told the others, before going back to the Throne of Winter. The others joined him. His scraping had revealed some new runes and he read them carefully. In the language of the first men they read, Stark had me made. Only a Stark will I bad. If not a Stark ye shall fade. He read the words out loud for the others, who looked at him with confusion. Fade, he mused. That's an odd word to use. Why should someone fade? There's an old saying here in the north that when someone's gone a bit, well, odd, that they've faded, Jon Stark said eventually. Could it be linked to that? Odd as in mad, you mean? He thought about it, and then terror sparked his mind as a number of connections appeared in his mind. No one sit in that throne. No one. What? Raider asked, baffled. Why not? The legends of the Night Fort, the people that have gone mad here, murdering and eating them, what if they found this place and then, on some whim, sat in that? The runes say that whatever it is it will only obey a Stark and that it will make anyone else fade. Go mad, in other words. It's been sealed off from the world for so long, that other door seems to have only yielded to the touch of a Stark. How many of the Night's Watch can read runes? How long has the throne been neglected so that the dirt of ages built up about it? For all we know, the Rat King, when he was just a cook, found this place and sat in that throne, and was sent mad. And the Night King, Mad Axe. How many others? There was a sudden collective move away from the throne. Tyrion raised a placatory hand. None of us have sat in it. I think that we are safe. But I have to transcribe those runes. Maester Aemon might have more light to shed on this. In the meantime, I think it best that the slab above us be replaced and a new lock be made for the door. This is important. You Starks seem to have had some kind of a plan, or to have set something up here. A long time ago though. A long time ago. Sander. He found himself almost liking the north, as he rode along the road behind the brat. It was the kind of place where you could tell a man to bugger off and not be looked at funny afterwards, or worse still, have some bloody fluttering prick claim that his honor had been besmirched and that they now needed to fight a duel. The last time he'd fought a duel it had been very short. No, but he did almost like the north. It was colder than King's Landing and bleaker, but there was something about the place that he found, well, fitting. It was a place where he might one day find a place. Perhaps. Maybe. The brat, of course, hated the place. It was too cold, the people didn't seem to respect his father enough, or not enough for his liking. And him too. The brat thought that everyone should grovel before him. To be honest, the north was not a place where people groveled. You couldn't. It wasn't that kind of place. This was a harsh, hard place. The gods only knew what it was like in winter, and from what everyone was saying, winter was coming. They were preparing for it too, something that balled the brat. It's still summer, the brat had told him that morning. Winter is a long time away. The citadel hasn't even sent out their white ravens. What do those stupid peasants have to worry about? The fact that the north was, well, further north than anywhere else in Westeros obviously didn't occur to the little prick. Did he never think about things like that? Of course not, he was Prince Joffrey, spoiled brat and prick of the First Order. Well, at least the little shit had stopped babbling nonsense about the sword. Stormbreaker was now something that he avoided looking at, did not talk about and avoided whenever possible. It was funny, in a way. What was less funny was that there was another Baratheon about, sort of. Gendry Storm looked a lot like his father, something that the brat resented. Fortunately, Gendry Storm also seemed to be always escorted by either Old Stoneface or a northern knight called Mormont. The two boys had so far not met, and long may that continue. The king seemed to like his bastard, and that was something else that the brat resented. He sighed a little as he looked back for a moment at the long line of men and women on horses and carts that stretched behind him, before looking at the line ahead. Somewhere on the road the king was riding with his second son, who kept asking questions about everything. He had a nagging feeling that something was going to go wrong someplace up ahead. Asher. She hated salvage work. Too much back-breaking work, often in freezing water, for too little reward. The bodies were also a problem, but in the worst cases you just put some rancid fat under your nostrils and breathed through your mouth a lot. The ship she was working on had been impaled on one of the iron spars and sank in place. Now, at low tide, they had pulled out the spar and were patching up the side of the ship. There were some bodies at the stern, bobbing in the dirty water there. One still had an arrow in his chest, another was missing a leg. She had no doubt that the leg was waiting to be discovered by some unfortunate man or woman. Still, the work took time. Kept her busy. Stopped her from thinking about things. Like the fact that the Iron Islands were now effectively in a state of civil war. One that she was now a major part in. Yes, father had started the whole thing, but what? What could she say in defense of her father now that so much blood had been shed? The man working next to her stopped working all of a sudden and she was about to turn and snarl at him to keep at it when she noticed the approaching figure of her nuncle. A closer look at his face showed that he was in a rare taking as angry as she had ever seen him. What's amiss? The orders that Victorian was obeying. Or trying to obey. God's damn your father. And especially damn fair. She looked at him as he raked his hair with a hand. Victorian will live then. He'll live. He'll have a headache for a week according to the maester and he'll have a limp for perhaps the rest of his life, but he'll live. It's what he was ordered to do here that, words fail me. He and his men were ordered to raze Harlaw to the ground. The entire island. Buildings burnt, ships stolen, land plowed with salt, men killed and women raped and deported to become salt wives. The iron price in full on my people. And why? We are all heretics according to Damfair, we do not deserve to live. Horror stole over her. Then they would have done the same thing to Great Wyk then. Yes. But that's two of the largest of the Iron Islands. Thousands of people live on them, that's madness. No, that's Damfair and your father. That's how they intend to rule. The drowned god rules them, and they rule us. She stood there, the thunder of the surf somehow a long way away, drowned out by the thunder of blood in her ears. She knew that she had made her choice to join her sane uncle months ago. But this all made things as real as they could ever be. Terrifyingly real. Then we must talk to the Stonerbrows and the others on Great Wyk. We must decide how to move against. Something seemed to stop her from speaking for a moment. Against my father. Uncle, I am ashamed to call myself a Greyjoy. He directed a sympathetic look at her. You are not the only one. Your brother has written to me from Winterfell. It was a long letter that he said that he dared not send to your father. He has been touched by the old gods themselves, he said. He no longer believes in the drowned god, as I suspected. He touched on it in his previous letters. This was more detailed. And more anguished. But he has made his choice. He paused and then pulled a face. There was other news. The Silence has been seen off the coast of the Reach. Sailing north. Asher stared at him. He would not dare, would he? The man's mad, Asher, he's always been mad. I've always wondered what happened to him to drive him so insane. I wish I knew what happened to him. He seemed to think for a moment, before shuddering a little. On second thoughts, perhaps I don't want to know. Madness is a place that it's hard to come back from. Where do you think he's going? I don't know, but I have sent out a warning to Great Wyk. They'll be ready if the Silence appears off their coast. She nodded somberly. Then she looked at him again. I would like to read what my brother sent you. You'll find it interesting. He was there when the call was sent out by Ned Stark. She thought about this for a long moment. My little brother's been having an interesting time of it then. Yes. But perhaps a bit less violent a time as we have had. Although he did say that he was going to the wall with Ned Stark for a meeting of the Lords of the North. He sighed. It makes me ashamed. The North prepares to fight on the wall against the others. Robert Baratheon writes for Winterfell. There's word that Houses Royce and Redfort also travel to Winterfell and the Company of the Rose has returned. And what do we do here on the Iron Islands? We fight each other because your father and his brother deny the call. Come. I'll show you the letter. And we need to plan our next move. Gendry. Tonight they were staying at a place that really annoyed the Queen, a small keep that was apparently owned by some family that had just gotten back to the north from Essos, or something like that anyway. He hadn't been near when someone had explained it to the crowd. What he did know however was that the keep's blacksmith was an old man with an apprentice who was so young that he barely knew the correct color for iron that was ready to be beaten into shape. When he had offered his services in the forge the old man had accepted rather reluctantly, until he'd seen Gendry fashion his first sword. And now he was pounding on what would be a hoe blade eventually. It was good to work on something that would be so needed when it came to tending the harvest. People seemed to be talking about it a lot around him, growing as much food as possible, getting ready for the winter. So this is where you are. He looked up at that and then smiled as he saw Shireen at the door to the forge. Then he frowned a little. You stay there. It's a dangerous place, a forge, and your father would have my head if you were hurt here. His cousin, that still felt so strange even now, rolled her eyes and then pointed at a low bench to one side. Will you worry less if I sit there? He sighed. Only if you stay there. It's safe there. Forges are dangerous, my lady. She rolled her eyes again. Stop calling me that. I'm your cousin. The hoe needed some attention, so he pounded on it for a moment. Never had a cousin before, he muttered in a low voice. Still hard to know how to talk to you. Shireen directed a piercing look at him, before nodding and seating herself on the bench. So what are you making? A hoe. For the crops. How long will it take you? As long as it takes. Too quickly and it won't be much use. Too long and that's time lost on making something else. You judge it as you go along. This seemed to make sense to her and she nodded, before watching as he worked and occasionally asking some very good questions about what it took to be a blacksmith. It was all just enough to make him relax just a bit. After a while she fell silent, before abruptly asking, "Can you make something for me?" He gave the hoe one last tap and then looked at her. "What do you need?" "It's father's name day soon. His old knife is broken and he was talking about getting it reforged. Can you make him a new one? I can pay for it. A general blade, or specifically made for him." Shireen blinked at him. "What's the difference?" "General blade is, well, made for anyone. If it's made for him then it's unique to him. The handle will be made for his hand, so I'll need to know how large his hand is." His cousin thought about that and then nodded, before sitting back and watching as he finished off the hoe, before wiping his hands and the hammer free of sweat and then starting on a second hoe. As he was about halfway through making it he realized that they were no longer alone. A slim blonde boy was standing in the doorway. He was dressed in fine leathers with a lot of fur attached. Frankly, he looked like a blonde weasel wearing his mother's furs. Gendry eyed him warily and bowed awkwardly. "My prince." The prince looked about with a sneer on his face. He didn't step into the forge, he looked at the floor as if it was filthy. Behind him loomed the large frame of Sander Clegane, the horrifically scarred man that men called the Hound. "So you're the bastard," he said eventually with an even larger sneer. "The blacksmith bastard." Anger stiffened his spine for a moment, but then reality hit him. "Yes, my prince. I am a bastard. And I am a blacksmith. Do you need anything worked on at the forge?" The prince eyed him in a slightly confused manner, obviously wondering why the bastard was being so polite. Then he seemed to rally a little. "At least you know your place." A smirk and a look over his shoulder at the Hound, who just stared back at him icily. "What are you working on?" "A hoe, my prince." "For the harvest?" "Oh, a hoe. For the peasants." Anger prickled at him and he added, "I've also been commissioned to make something for the hand of the king." The sneer seemed to deepen, if such a thing was possible. "Really? For my uncle, Lord Stannis? You are a bastard with delusions. You lie. Perhaps I should get my dog here to give you a thrashing for lying to a prince." As he cursed himself for opening his mouth and took a slightly better grip on his hammer he was interrupted by a delicate clearing of a throat. "Actually, cousin Joffrey," said Shireen, "he's telling the truth." The prince, "No, the little shit as everyone else seemed to call him, amongst the Stormlanders and non-Lannisters at least actually jumped a little, before stepping in and looking at Shireen. What the seven hells are you here for? Shireen looked back at him stonily. Commissioning a new knife for my father from our cousin. He's very good with that hammer. The little shit seemed to quiver with uncertainty for a long moment, looking from Shireen to him, to the hound and then back to him. He seemed to be slightly fearful about Shireen, and Gendry remembered the tales of how he had shunned her for her old grayscale scars. Then he seemed to rally a little. Well, what a match. The bastard blacksmith and the silly little girl. Shireen just stared at him and then stood up from the bench. You wanted to say scarred little girl, didn't you? Well, you can't. The scars are gone. The old gods cured me. I've found things and seen things and lived through things that you can't imagine. So, you know nothing, cousin. The little shit flushed with fury and took a step towards Shireen that raised Gendry's hackles. Shit, he thought, this is going to be bad. And then another throat was cleared at the door on the other end of the forge, and Stannis Baratheon stepped into the room. He was dressed in his own leathers and had a sheath of messages in his hand. His eyes were also burning with anger. Nephew, he said, glowering at Joffrey in a way that made the little shit cringe more than a bit. Are you insulting my daughter? The little shit paled and all but danced from foot to foot for a moment. No. The glower intensified. Good. Do you have somewhere else to be? Yes. Then I suggest you go and do something there. If I find you bothering my daughter or your bastard half-brother, I shall be annoyed. The little shit pulled a face that might have been an attempt at an ingratiating smirk, before all but fleeing. Stannis Baratheon watched him go with an odd, unreadable expression on his face and then walked through the door that the little shit had left by. Gendry. My lord. Thank you for keeping my daughter safe in this forge. Gods, how long had he been there? I'd never risk her here, my lord. His uncle paused for a moment and then tossed something at Shireen, who caught it with wide eyes. The handle to my old knife. And then he strode out. Gendry looked at Shireen, who sent a beaming smile back at him. Bronn. It was odd how the sight of the foxhole up ahead raised his spirits. He'd spent so long hoping for a little holdfast somewhere, and then when he did get one, well, bigger than he had ever dreamt of, he found himself getting far more emotional about it than he ever dared imagine. Home. He was home. Such a strange concept. Father would have laughed his ass off and then paused and told him that he was right. As he and his guards clattered in through the main gate and then up before the keep, he could see activity as many people started to gather. Ursula Stone was one, as she directed people into place before smoothing out her skirts and then clasping her hands before her stomach. And then there was Maester Hayster, who was walking into place. Both looked reasonably calm, which was a good sign. Dismounting, he handed his horse off to a groom with a word of thanks and then walked up to the others. She's still alive then? She is, his steward said in a hard voice. She had a few close brushes with the stranger, but she's still alive. Bronn nodded and then dismissed all but Stone and Hayster. How is she? The Maester pulled a slight face. She has good days and bad days, my lord. Good days outnumber the bad days at the moment. On the bad days, the loss of her arm seems to come as a shocking surprise in the mornings. On the good days, well, she gives us a lot of orders. Bronn stared at them both. Orders? What kind of orders? The Maester looked embarrassed whilst Ursula Stone looked a bit like her last name. Then she coughed a little. Oh, orders on the lines of saddle the horses, I demand I be taken to the Eyrie at once, send a raven to Winterfell at once, my son must be sent back straight away, and then Lord Arryn is dead, I am the Lady Regent of the Vale, you will obey my orders at once. Only louder. Much louder. He rubbed at the bridge of his own nose for a moment. Well, she can whistle for all that. Lord Arryn is most certainly alive and well, and very angry with her. How long will it be before she's well enough to travel? Hayster chewed his lip for a moment and somehow managed to look even younger. Travel to King's Landing, my lord. The lip got chewed a bit again. Maybe a month. Maybe 2. Losing an arm was a terrible strain on Lady Arryn, my lord. Something seemed to occur to him. Is she even still Lady Arryn? Bron's eyebrows went up and down for a moment. That's a good question. I don't know. Lord Arryn didn't exactly say if he'd divorced her, although given the fact that she tried to kill him he'd have reason to. I would if I was him. Then something occurred to him as well. Does she even know that Lord Arryn's still alive? We haven't mentioned it to her, his steward said with a distinct gleam to her eye. It will no doubt come as a shock. He eyed her carefully. And you think that I'm the one to tell her? She should know how badly she failed. He was going to reply on the lines of "You're a hard woman, Ursula Stone," but then he remembered the thing that he was carrying. Instead he turned to the maester. I'll talk to her later on. Monitor her closely, Lord Arryn himself wants her in King's Landing for her trial. Then he turned to his steward. I need to talk to you. They found a small room just off the main hall of the keep, and once they were in it Bronn closed the door and then looked about. It seemed safe and secured, and this wasn't King's fucking Landing. Still, he kept his voice low as he asked, has she talked about the letter she had? No, she has not. You gave it to Lord Arryn then? I did. He was most grateful. He paused and then he pulled out the piece of parchment from his coat. He gave me this. She stared at it. What is it? A gift from Lord Arryn. To me and to you for our discretion about the letter. That's not very informative. What is it? The document that makes you a Corlish. Ursula Stone went as white as a sheet, her face shocked into total immobility. What? She said eventually in a very small voice. I asked Lord Arryn if he could legitimize you. He's acting hand of the king at the moment. She stared at the document, her face still shocked, and then she reached out with a trembling hand and took it from him. He watched as she cracked the seal on it and then read it carefully. When she was finished she stared at him as if she had no idea what he was. Why? That was a good question, and one that he had long pondered over. Because he said eventually, I am Lord of the Foxhold, but I need a lot of help. This place is my home now. I need to know it better. I need someone who knows it. And you know it best of all. This was your home long before it was mine. I know that you had no plans to leave, but I wanted something to really ground you here and keep you. He struggled for the next word. Here. Helping me here. There was a long moment of almost audible tension in the air, as something bubbled up unsaid at the back of his mind, and then she nodded. Very well. I know what you mean. She sniffed slightly, her nostrils flaring. You do need help. And then she stared at him again. You are a very odd man, Bronn Castle. He smirked at her. Oh, I'm practically unique. Thank you, Ursula Corlish. There was another pause, as intense emotion flickered on her face, sadness and mourning and jubilation and something else, before she broke it by curtsying formally before him. Thank you, my lord. And as she walked off there was a swish to her hips that most definitely caught his eye. Tyrion. Oddly enough, Mance Rayder turned out to be a very good artist indeed, skilled with charcoal on paper. His sketch of the Throne of Winter, or rather the oldest Throne of Winter, was a remarkably fine one, and he was now inking over the charcoal with a quill. The room was bare now, swept clean of the filth that had been everywhere. The bones had all been burned. All of them, and the rags that so many of them had been in. There was still a smell in the air, but the room was as clean as it would ever be. It made the Throne of Winter stand out even more than it already did. It was, and the pun was unintentional, quite a stark thing. The carvings were odd. They were old, oh, so very old. Cleaning them had been something of a trial, as no one wanted to get anywhere near the bloody thing. He'd ended up wiping it down with a ball of wet cloth on the end of a stick, using the other end of the stick to push away the nastier debris at the base. All of that filth was gone as well. They'd had a big pyre for it all. On the back of the seat of the chair there was a carving of a man, possibly with the head of a wolf overlaying the head of the carving. It had to be a Stark. On the sides of the throne, facing outward to the right and the left, were a small figure that might have been a child, except that it didn't seem to have enough fingers and toes, and some kind of sinuous dragony thing. It was hard to tell, and he really didn't want to get too close to it. Oh, and in the left-hand arm of the throne was a little alcove. It was empty. All in all, it was a most perplexing thing. The simplest way to test out what it was would have been to have a Stark sit in it, but neither seemed to want to go anywhere near it, not that he could blame them whatsoever. That said, both Starks were looking at it now, from some distance away. They seemed to have having a whispered conversation that covered much of his own thoughts. Whatever it was, it had been hidden. Certainly sealed away. Why? And what did it do? He heard the sound of boots behind him, but didn't turn to look at whoever it was. He was thinking too hard. The boots stopped suddenly, and then a new voice said, "Bugger me, Rob, what have you found? What is this thing?" Startled, he turned. Benjen Stark was standing there in riding gear, looking rumpled, travel-stained and deeply weary. Deeply astonished as well. "Uncle Benjen." Both the Starks said the question at the same time, before grinning hugely and striding over to embrace their uncle, who returned the gesture with a grin that reminded him of Uncle Geryon, as their direwolves walked over and sniffed at him. "Whatever are you doing here, Uncle?" Robb Stark asked. "I thought you were headed south with the head of that white, to show all the naysayers in high places there. I was the first range aside, but then I felt a sudden need to be here. At the night fort. I met a wandering brother of mine, Yoren by name, and gave him the head in the cage as he headed south, and then I rode north as fast as I could." "What in the name of the gods is it?" Tyrion smiled wryly as he stumped up to the older Stark. "The Throne of Winter, and yes, I know, that's at Winterfell. This seems to be a different, possibly older, version. The chamber was locked with the deal of the old kings in the north, but we found, well, people had found a way in through the ceiling," Uncle Benjen John Stark muttered. "And there's a carving on the throne that says that only a Stark can use it. If you're not a Stark, well, you go mad, we think." He looked at his uncle somberly. "There were a lot of bodies here, Uncle Benjen. Just bones, but, well, there were cooking pots in here too. We think that this is the place where the Rat King ruled, if you can call it that. This seems to be the place where all the dark tales of the Night Fort come from." Benjen Stark stared at them all carefully and then looked at the throne. "Are those runes on it?" "I," replied Robb Stark. "Old ones, according to Tyrion here." The first ranger turned to look at him. "Lord Tyrion. We met briefly on the road to Castle Black, did we not?" "We did," he replied as he shook the hand of the new Stark. "And I am very glad that you don't have that head in a cage anymore. It positively made the hairs on the back of head stand on end." "Are the runes?" "Yes, they are old indeed. Very old. As old as the wall, I think." "By the old gods," the other man muttered, before peering quizzically at Raider, who was carefully inking the last of the drawing. "Why the picture? And, from the description, is that man's Raider?" "I am Raider," replied as he looked up from his drawing. Then he grinned almost boyishly. "I've been asked to draw this for Lord Tyrion there and his lady friend, who sounds very interesting." Benjen Stark looked confused. "Lady friend?" "Lady Daisy Sherristone's father was a notable historian," Tyrion said with as much dignity as he could summon. "He wrote a history of the first men, and this surely deserves mention in it. She'll want more than a description. Raider here mentioned he could draw, and by the gods he surely can." He paused. Benjen Stark's face had frozen. "Was Lord Sherristone is dead?" "I'm afraid so. We think that he might have been murdered by a Riverlander who thought he was the heir to Sherristone. I escorted Daisy Sherristone, his real heir, on the King's Road to Winterfell. I remember him," Stark said sadly. "A good man. He visited Winterfell one year with his family, just before I left to join the Night's Watch." He peered at Raider again, his eyes hooded. "Your people are settling well into the gift, from what I saw." Raider walked over to Tyrion and handed him the drawing, before smiling slightly. "We've got a lot to do there," he muttered, before pulling a face. "I'm afraid that in places it's badly neglected." Benjen Stark shook his head. "We've tried. All too often we've failed. Of course, past raids by your people haven't helped." "I know," Raider sighed. "Ironic, isn't it? We repair the damage that we helped to inadvertently cause, because doing so will save us both. Winter is coming, as you Starks say." And with that he walked off. Benjen Stark watched him go with an enigmatic look and then a shake of the head, before looking back at the throne. What in the name of the old gods is it? We don't know, Robb Stark replied. Perhaps there might be a reference to it in some record somewhere. His uncle nodded slowly. Perhaps in Castle Black or Ned Solar. Well, you've been busy. More boots sounded and then Sir Alisa Thorne strode in and blinked at the sight of the First Ranger. What are you doing here, First Ranger? Good to see you as well, Alisa. He grinned at him until the sour other man finally unbent enough to smile back just a little. I had a sudden feeling that I was needed here. Given what else has been happening of late, I thought I should listen to it. Sorry I was late to the party here. Something tickled at the back of Tyrion's head. Late. That meant something. But what? Late. Then he remembered. Watch out for late wolves. I was told. I was told to watch out for late wolves here, he said, suddenly startled. In that letter written by my ancestor, Tywin Lannister. What letter? Benjen Stark asked, confused. A long story. A letter was found in Castle Black from one Tywin Lannister, the last Lord Commander of the Night's Watch to command from the Night Fort, addressed to me. It said I had things to find here which I have. The ancestral weapons of the Castellets. And that I had to help a man through a gate here. Oh, and I had to watch out for late wolves. What gate? The main gate here is still mostly blocked. We've found the Black Gate, Sir Alisa replied gravely. That's why I came here. It's in a bloody well for some reason, in the kitchens. You need to see it. Oddest thing I've ever seen. He seemed to think about that for a long moment. I never thought I'd say that. Yes, well, life has been more than odd since the call was sent out, Tyrion said wryly as they trooped out of the door and down the corridor. The well was a big one and an odd one. There were iron rungs on the side of one wall that allowed them to go down into it, something that gave Tyrion a bad case of the creeping horrors, enlivened a little by the excited whimpers that the direwolves gave as they were carried down. The light of the lanterns that someone had hung at the top of the well and again about 10 rungs down were enough to see by, and also the glint of dark water far below. But the oddest thing of all was the doorway in the wall. It was open, but Tormund Giantsbane was standing there, a lantern in one hand, staring hard at the wall of the well opposite the entrance. He made room for them all as they crowded in and then pointed at the wall. There's another door there. It's bricked up, but there's something there. Tyrion looked at the place the wilderling was pointing at and then blinked. Yes, there was indeed a bricked up entrance there. Perhaps we should see what's on the other side. I'll get a sledgehammer, Giantsbane said with a slightly mad glint in his eye. I like that sledgehammer that I saw up there. You can do some proper damage with that. And then he vanished up the well, moving remarkable fast for such a big man. Tyrion looked at the others, noted Mance Rayder's wry shrug and then turned around. The Black Gate was made of white weirwood. And there was a face on it. It was old, pale, shrunken, and wrinkled, but it was a face. The creeping horrors were back. Alisa Thorne was next to it, as pale as a ghost, whilst Benjen Stark was almost as pale. This is a gate? Thorne asked. From what Maester Aemon said, I expected something more, gate-like. How does it work? Robb Stark asked as he peered at it, obviously fascinated. Apparently only a member of the Night's Watch can open it, Thorne replied. He looked at Rayder sidewise. I wonder if a former member could as well. How about I don't try at all? Rayder replied. You go ahead. Thorne looked at the gate, took a deep breath and stepped up to it. To Tyrion's astonishment and the astonishment of them all, the eye of the face on the gate opened, seemed to focus on Thorne and then said in a moaning voice, Who are you? After a moment of what looked to be a great effort of pulling himself together, Thorne replied, I am the Watcher on the walls. I am the fire that burns against the cold, the light that brings the dawn, the horn that wakes the sleepers. I am the shield that guards the realms of men. And then the mouth of the face started to open, gaping wider and wider until there was nothing but the void. There was a passage on the other side. Thorne and the First Ranger started down the passageway, along with the Starks and Rayder. Just before Tyrion followed them, he heard the sound of feet on the rungs again and looked back to see a rather excited Tormund Giantsman hefting a sledgehammer and then giving the wall opposite him the kind of look that Aemon the Conqueror might have given the old map of Westeros before the conquest. The passage was as cold as the wall above, and it made Tyrion wish that he was wearing better boots as it was a bit slippery in places. And it emerged on the other side of the wall, not far from a grove of trees. As he passed through there was an odd noise behind him and he turned to see the passageway close until it was nothing more than a faint face on the wall. The other side of the wall was, well, rather like the other side. Nevertheless he still shuddered as he looked north. Now that he knew what was out there, well, it gave a new sense of dread. There was something black and terrible out there. He shivered a little. You know, Raider, it's still summer and I would hate to live north of the wall. Winter up here must be horrible. Beyond horrible for a southerner like you, Raider, said Riley. Cold like you wouldn't believe, with a wind that can slice you to the bone, or that's what it feels like. Tyrion shivered a little. He couldn't put a finger on it, but he felt uneasy and he really didn't know why. And the worst of it was that the feeling was getting slowly worse. He also felt as if he was missing something. Something's wrong, he muttered. Something's about to happen, but I don't know why or where or how. Why was I supposed to come here? Who needs to be let through the wall with my help? Well, Benjen Stark said with a sigh. At least we know where the Black Gate is now. How so few knew about it escapes me. Time, I expect, Tyrion replied. Nothing but time. The feeling was still growing. Tyrion, what's wrong? Asked Robb Stark. I don't know. I just have a feeling that something somewhere is wrong. Perhaps we should return to the other side of the wall. The others nodded to varying degrees and then they started to walk back to the wall, where Benjen Stark repeated the words to open the gate. But then, as the passage opened again, they heard the long high wailing noise of a horn, far off. Benjen Stark and Alisa Thorne both stopped dead in their tracks and looked at each other, before turning and looking north, followed by Mance Rayder. Do you have any patrols out there? Benjen Stark asked. No, we drew them all back in. The half-hand didn't want to take any chance that a patrol might clash with a party of wildlings coming south to the wall. Things were tense enough as it was. Thorne frowned. That was the horn of a man of the Night's Watch though. The unease grew stronger in Tyrion. This is the only place where a man can cross near here, right? Yes, the gate here at the Night Fort is still blocked. First Ranger, if we hear it again you should answer it with your own horn. His right hand itched for a moment, but before he could speak Robb Stark stepped forwards. His face was set and he seemed almost to be sniffing the air. You're right. Something's wrong. I think that horn is the man you are supposed to help through the gate. I also think that we need to be very, very careful. And I also think that you need Rocktooth. There was a reason why Tyrion Lannister was buried with it. Go back down the passage and get it, as well as the others. Tell Theon to bring the dragon-glass-tipped arrows. He ran. Whatever it was that Ned Stark had been teaching his sons, it was very effective and included the kind of voice of command that father would give his eye teeth for. Down the passageway he ran, as fast as he could, and he cursed his legs, his little stumpy accursed legs. He almost slipped and fell several times as he ran, and he made sure that he slowed as he reached the other end of the passage, as he had no intention of going for a bath. Much to his surprise, Tormund Giantsman had hammered the bricked-up entrance open and there was more than a hint of brick dust in the air. There was a passageway that seemed to head upwards, or that was what he seemed to see. Tormund. There seemed to be a light up the passageway, a light that suddenly started to approach. It was Tormund Giantsman, who seemed highly excited. I found a passage. With this hammer here. The wildling leader gestured with the sledgehammer. He was covered in all kinds of dust and his eyes were a bit unhinged. It goes up. I think there's another bricked-up door at the end. Tyrion frowned. That actually seemed to make sense. Putting the Black Gate in the well seemed to be a very silly idea, unless someone had blocked it off and then forgotten about it. Forget about that for a moment, we need to get the others. Something happening the other side of the wall. The red-bearded wildling frowned a lot and then gestured up the passageway with his thumb. Faster to get them this way than climbing up. You climb up and get them, I'm going find out what's at the other end of the passageway. And then he turned and ran off, shouting what seemed to be an encouraging hammer song. Tyrion shook his head and then sprang up the rungs, using every trick that he'd been taught for tumbling. When he emerged in the kitchen he orientated himself and then ran for the doors. As he did he seemed to hear a low but regular noise, as if someone was using a sledgehammer on a wall somewhere close. The others were in the main keep. Theon Greyjoy and the Grit girl were discussing arrow binding for some reason, watched by Val and the Greyjoy's direwolf, whilst Uncle Geryon, Illyrian and the others were watching Pod as he stitched something together that looked leather. As Tyrion skidded to a halt, panting, Pod looked up. "I finished the harness for Rocktooth, Lord Tyrion," his squire said with a slight smile. "Scabbards for the knives too, there was some good leather here. Did I hear a horn earlier?" The other man of the Night's Watch, Larkin, was frowning in the direction of the wall. "Wait, there it is again." And then they heard another horn, this one on the other side of the wall, or that was what it sounded like. Larkin stood up with an oath. "What's happening? We're all needed on the other side of the Black Gate. Pod, give me my weapons please. Robb Stark sent me back to get you all." "Theon Greyjoy, Robb Stark said that you need to bring the dragon-glass-tipped arrows." The squidling went as white as a sheet, exchanged a horrified glance with Ygritte, who also looked strained, but then stood and picked up a quiver of arrows. Uncle Geryon exchanged a long look with his son, who looked worried, but then fastened his sword belt around his waist and also stood. Brightraw was a reassuring presence, but nothing compared to what he felt as Pod helped him with the harness that carried Rocktooth. The moment that he put it on it felt strangely right. The itch in his hand stopped for a start. The daggers went onto his belt and then he started out with the others for the kitchen. Not that they got there. All of a sudden there was a crash and a section of wall gave way to one side, revealing a triumphant Tormund Giantsman. He was in an even more dusty state, but he was grinning hugely and waving both his sledgehammer and his torch. "Not one but two doorways. And here I am. This must be the passageway that originally led to the Black Gate. Ha ha." He looked at them and then seemed to realize what he looked like. Bit dusty, but no rungs. Tyrion gaped at him and then pointed at the passageway. "Down there." Then he paused. "Wait, we need planks or beams to cross the well at the bottom." They managed it. The passageway was indeed filthy. Covered in the dust and accumulated filth of the centuries, if not the thousands of years, since it had last been used, but they made it to the bottom, bridged it and then crossed to the Black Gate, which was closed. Fortunately Larkin was there to say the words, and after a long moment of astonishment from the others after seeing the gate open, they were hurrying though. "I have dreamt this," Tyrion thought desperately as he ran back down the passageway. "I dreamt this days earlier, didn't I?" As they emerged at the other side he could feel the tension. Benjen Stark had his sword in his right hand and a horn in the other, whilst all the others had drawn their swords. As the newcomers arrived then they too drew their weapons, whilst Robb Stark lowered eyes and turned to them. There was a horn from the north, in the haunted forest. Once from far away and then again from closer. Uncle Benjen replied to it. "Someone is coming. One blast is the sign of the approach of a member of the Night's Watch." "What are the others?" Uncle Geryon asked, Brightraw in his hand. "2 for approaching wildlings," Alisa Thorne barked. 3 for others. No one's heard that last one for thousands of years. I think we might hear is soon on the wall." They waited. Val was talking quietly with Rhaeda, who seemed to be giving her tips on the best way to wield a dragon-glass knife, whilst Jon Stark was watching Ygritte and Theon as they strung their bows and readied their arrows. And then the horn call came again, nearer this time and urgent. Benjen Stark quickly replied to it and then there was another pause. It was broken by Pod. "Lord Tyrion, are your knives glowing?" He looked at them and then blanched. They were indeed glowing, just enough to be noticed, but the glow seemed to be waxing. And then he made the connection. The warnings, they were called. Gods above, they warn. Alisa Thorne looked baffled. Warn? Warn of what? The answer came as the horn sounded again to the north. First one blast, then a pause and then another one, followed by another. And then another. Terror prickled his scalp for a moment as all the direwolves growled at the same time. "Others come." The others must be chasing him. Benjamin Stark cursed and then shrugged off his backpack and rummaged through it, before pulling out about 10 small clay pots. Oil, for whites, he explained. Torches. Keep those torches lit. We'll need them. They waited again and then Tyrion narrowed his eyes slightly. Birds were erupting from a part of the forest ahead of them. Someone was coming and he pulled out Rocktooth from its harness and weighed it in his hands. It was heavy but it felt right. Everything about it now felt, well, right. More birds erupted upwards and then he could see something coming. It was an elk, a galloping elk, with a black-clad figure on its back. There was what appeared to be a bow in one hand of the rider and he seemed to be looking behind him, before turning his head and then spurring the elk towards the waiting group by the black gate. Cold hands. Benjamin Stark said and then shouted, Cold hands. Here. But the birds were still stirring in the forest and Tyrion knew with a sinking heart that whoever this Cold Hands was, he was not alone. The tree line shivered for a moment and then suddenly there were dozens of running figures there. He stared at them and then he went white. Whites. They had to be whites. They were in rags or worse, blooded or worse, maimed, or worse. Skin was white or in some cases green or even black and here and there he could see a ribcage or an arm bone. Whites, Jon Stark growled. Stand ready. They waited and then the bows in the hands of Theon and Ygritte sounded again with their deep thrum. The two were good and they had easy targets. The whites they were aiming from never even tried to dodge the incoming arrows, but not every arrow found its mark and there only 2 of them. Nevertheless, those arrows that found their mark killed the whites. The elk was almost on them, and as it approached it slowed, its chest heaving with exertion. The rider seemed to be almost reeling in his saddle, but when he saw Benjamin Stark he raised a trembling hand and croaked, Well met, brother. I told you that we would meet again. And then he leant over too far and fell to the ground, before seeming to regather his strength and standing on shaking legs, before pulling out what seemed to be a piece of a spear from his side. Tyrion eyed this with horror, before looking back at the oncoming whites. They seem to want you rather badly. They want me dead, Cold Hands rasped, before picking up his bow and then joining the other archers in sending arrow after arrow at the whites. Brother, I have oil in my saddlebags as well. And then the whites were on them. Tormund Giantsbane roared as he hammered at their ranks, left and right with his sledgehammer, crushing skulls and breaking limbs with each sweep, but it was the swords in the hands of Robb Stark and Uncle Geryon that seemed to do the most damage. Every white that they stabbed went limp and died, as did the whites facing Jon Stark. That sword he bore, was it Valyrian steel? The 3 direwolves snarled and darted back and forth at the feet of the Starks, lunging for every exposed tendon on a white and tearing them out. Alisa Thorne and Larkin fought together, hacking off limbs with their own swords, whilst Illyrian stabbed at any white that tried to flank his father. As for Mance Rayder and Val, they both had a sword in one hand and a dragon-glass dagger in the other, and they chose where to stab with great care, as some of the whites had rusted armor on them. And then Benjamin Stark started to throw his oil pots around, their wicks lit. He aimed at the whites still approaching and they went up like kindling. Most men would have quailed and then run from such a slaughter, but these were not men or women, these were the dead, and the dead felt no fear. They just kept coming, to be struck down or smashed to pieces or set on fire. And there were a lot of them, so much so that eventually 2 got past the flank and then ran at Tyrion. He gulped and then Pod got the first one, hacking it to pieces with quite a bit of venom, but also taking a bit too much time, because the other one was still coming. Tyrion hefted Rocktooth in both hands, eyed the oncoming white, and then he stepped to one side quickly and swung the axe at the center of the white's chest with all his strength. He expected it to perhaps smash the white back and perhaps gain enough time for a second swing. What he was not expecting was for the blade of Rocktooth to obliterate every rib the white had, as if the bones were made of paper, before the white literally fell to pieces in front of him, as if Rot had suddenly sped up. "Fuck me," he whispered as the pieces fell to the ground. "Now that I did not expect." Tyrion, Uncle Geryon shouted as he rammed Brightraw through the eye socket of a white that was almost a skeleton. "What the 7 hells was that?" "Rocktooth is not fond of whites, Uncle," he called back with a slightly hysterical laugh. And then he shut up because another white was running at him. This time he swung for the legs, and before he knew it, it was raining pieces of white. "The imp has fangs." Tormund Giantsbane roared as he smashed a white's head so far down into its chest that the rotting blue eyes looked through its own ribs. He needs a better name though. Tyrion Lionfang Lannister. Robb Stark laughed as he cut down a white with a great overhead blow. Why not? Another white came at Tyrion and he dealt with it in the same manner, before he noticed that Pod had gotten his sword stuck in the chest of a white that was now scrabbling for the boy's head with rotten hands. Pod. My lord. Duck. The lad threw himself back and down and Rocktooth cleaved the air where he had been standing and hit the head of the white, which froze and then disintegrated, freeing Pod's sword. "We're out of arrows," Theon Greyjoy shouted as he threw down his bow and then drew his sword, followed by Ygritte, but then they looked about in vain for more whites. "By the old gods," Robb Stark panted as he looked about as well. Was that the last of them? No, rasped Cold Hands as he stood over the whites that he'd killed with his one sword after running out of arrows. "Beware, there are others out there somewhere. I can feel it." The man, or whatever he was, wasn't out of breath at all. "What now?" Thorn barked. "Back through the gate." "I cannot pass through the gate," Cold Hands muttered. "Not without help." "What kind of weight?" "Tyrion, your daggers are glowing again." They were indeed, only this time it was with a colder, harsher light. They seemed to startle Cold Hands, who peered at them and then at him as if he was only now seeing him properly. "By the old gods, are those the warnings? And is that Rocktooth?" "Yes to both questions," Tyrion answered as he watched the tree line. "I am Tyrion Lannister." "Wait, you've seen them before?" "When I was a child," Cold Hands said almost sadly. "In the hands of a Lannister who did not think that they were good enough weapons for his house." "Yes, well, they're more than good enough for me," Tyrion muttered slightly dazedly. Then he paused. There seemed to be a bit more vapor in the air when he breathed. It was colder than it had been a few minutes ago. "It's getting colder. Is that normal north of the wall?" "Others." The call came from Alisa Thorne, who looked as if he did not believe what he was looking at. Tyrion turned his head a little. Oh. A figure had emerged from the trees, with frost spreading out from the ground wherever he trod. Its skin was almost a white blue color, its hair was pure white and its eyes were like small blue stars. It was dressed in a kind of old-fashioned looking grey armor that seemed to be a kind of leather with metal on it, and he was holding a sword that looked odd, as if it was made of ice or crystal. And it was not alone. 3 more figures, similar to it in dress and appearance, joined it. They looked at the group by the gate and then they looked at Cold Hands and then they started walking towards the wall, spreading out as they came. "Fire deters them," Raider said urgently. "Is there any more oil?" "I used the last of it on the whites," muttered Benjen Stark as he hefted his own sword. "Cold Hands, what do they want?" "Me," rasped the hooded man. "They want me. They want me dead, to be precise. They've long hunted me. We need fire and dragon glass. Your swords are useless." "We have no more torches and that's all the dragon glass we have," Raider muttered as he looked down at his dagger. "Damn it, we should have brought more." "Father," said Illyrian quietly, "we need him." "But the danger is worth the risk," replied Uncle Jerian. "We have something they've never seen before, Valyrian steel. Let's test a theory." And with that he stepped forwards towards the nearest other. "Uncle, no!" Tyrion shouted in anguish, but it was too late. The other stared at Uncle Jerian as if he was nothing and then lifted his sword with frightening speed and slashed at his neck, only for his sword to meet Brytraw with a clash of metal on ice. It was a loud, discordant sound and it drew the eyes of everyone, including the others, who stared with suddenly wide eyes. "Test confirmed," Uncle Jerian grinned, before pushing the other back and then slashing at its eyes. The creature fell back a step, apparently astonished, before parrying another blow and then attacking itself. Jerian blocked the first blow and then the second, before shouting, "Don't just stand there, you Starks, attack!" And then he ducked under a great slash and plunged Brytraw into the chest of the other, who imploded into a million shards of ice. As Uncle Jerian stepped back, panting with effort, the 2 Stark brothers burst into action. For the north, they both bellowed, for Winterfell. Their swords hammered at the upraised blades of the next 2 others, who seemed to still be astonished at what was going on. "We need to kill them all," Tyrion muttered, before raising his voice. "They must not escape. They don't know about Valyrian steel." "Easier said than done," Robb Stark replied as he hammered at the other with ice. But yes, kill them all. Where did Ned Stark's bastard get a Valyrian steel blade? Thorne muttered dazedly. But that wasn't what was bothering Tyrion. Robb Stark was engaging one of the others, Jon Stark was fighting another, with Uncle Geryon coming to his aid, but there was another one out there and he was striding inexorably towards Cold Hands. Larkin was the closest to the creature and was falling back but not fast enough. The blade it bore slashed out suddenly and then the man of the Night's Watch was falling to the ground, his throat a bloody ruin. The next closest was, naturally, Pod and Tyrion. "Get behind me, Pod!" Tyrion shouted as he raised Rocktooth. "Get behind me now!" The boy scurried behind him and Tyrion dug his boots in and watched the other as it came. The skin was tight on its face, as if it was almost mummified, and the eyes glittered with an inexorable purpose. To one side he heard a shout of triumph as something erupted into the air, and then another, and he knew that the other two others were defeated and there was now just this one, but the Starks and Uncle Geryon were all the way over there and he was all the way over here, and his palms were sweaty and his heart was hammering at his chest and he knew that he was about to die, but he still lifted the axe with a snarl on his face. "Piss off, you blue bastard!" he shouted, and then as the other swung its sword he lifted Rocktooth. Something seemed to chime deep within him for a long moment and then everything seemed to slow to a crawl. He could see Robb Stark running to one side, approaching with a glacial slowness as he swung ice, but right now there was just Rocktooth and the icy blade of the other. He pulled on the handle somehow as he twisted himself, willing himself to move faster, and then time seemed to speed up and then suddenly he felt Rocktooth judder to a halt. He looked up to see that the blade was buried in the belly of the other, which was gaping down at him, and then it seemed to wail and then explode into 1,000 fiery fragments that shot up and away from Tyrion. There was a long silence, or that was what it felt like to Tyrion as the blood thundered in his ears, before he lowered the axe. "Bugger me," he whispered. "Why did my ancestors hide this thing?" He suspected he knew why, though it worked on others very well indeed, and no one had seen them for thousands of years. And then the silence was broken as various people started to talk. Tormund Giantsbane had his sledgehammer over his head and was bellowing with triumph, whilst Mance Rayder was embracing Alisa Thorne and Benjen Stark, all of whom were laughing with stressed relief. Theon Greyjoy was joking with the Starks, the two Wilderling girls were staring at the Starks, Uncle Geryon was grinning at his rather exasperated son, and Cold Hands was just standing there. Tyrion walked up to the hooded man. "Why can't you pass through the Black Gate?" Cold Hands seemed to consider this question for a long moment, before seeming to sigh. "Whites cannot pass the wall of their own accord," he said sadly. "And I am something that falls between human and white." This broke the spell of laughter and relief. All turned to look at the hooded man, although Benjen Stark seemed to be nodding in sudden understanding. "What are you?" Alisa Thorne barked. "No," replied Tyrion. "Who are you?" "He's a Stark," replied the first ranger. "Rickon Stark, the son of Edwyle Stark." He looked at Cold Hands. "You've been wandering beyond the wall for a long time, brother." Cold Hands looked down at the ground for a long moment and then he pulled his hood back and tugged his scarf off. Tyrion swallowed. This was not a white, but he was not alive either. The hair was black, but touched with silver at the temples, but the face was thin and drawn, the skin white in places and black in others, especially at the jaw. He looked around at all of them in turn, his eyes flinching a little as he looked at the Stark boys. "I need to get through the wall to complete my mission," Cold Hands said slowly. "But I don't know how." "What mission?" Thorne had a hand on the hilt of his sword. "When the wall was built, it was by men. By Bran the Builder and the first men. But they did not understand the magic that was in the earth. The soil. The trees. As the wall," he clenched his fists, "solidified, the links between north and south were slowly cut. The children of the forest north of the wall could not talk to their brethren in the south. So they prepared a great magic and they sent word to the wall that they what needed to be done to fix it. I went north, to talk to their greatest leader, their Greenseer of Greenseers. He gave me a task to perform. I had to bear something south of the wall. Magic. But the others felt it, or knew somehow of it, and they stirred out of their long sleep to try and stop me. And they found me. Almost killed me. I would have died if not for the children of the forest. They were able to stop me from turning. I do not breath, I have no pulse, but brothers, I am no white. I am my own man, I do not hear their orders. And I have waited these long years. Thorn still had his hand on his sword. Waited for what? There was a prophecy. There would be a man with a golden mind, and a boy who died and fell through time. They'd help me. And something else. Swords of fire. That's all I know. Tyrion peered at him. I know that I am the man with the golden mind, I'm a Lannister. As for the boy who died and fell through time, I don't know. But as for swords of fire, we have 3 swords made from Valyrian steel here. As I have long suspected that the Valyrians made their swords with dragon fire, perhaps we should test something. Uncle Gerion, could you hold Brightraw near Cold Hands? His uncle stared at him for a moment, but then drew his sword and held it close to Cold Hands, who shuddered in reaction. I like that, not the almost white said with a groan. But I feel heat and fire from it. They all stared at him, before a sudden slight movement reminded them all that some of the white parts were still twitching. We must burn them, Robb Stark said, before looking at Larkin's body sadly. He was killed by another. Will he rise again? He will, Rhaegar replied. Sir Alisa, do you need my dragon glass knife? The bitter man looked as if he was about to spit to one side, but then seemed to restrain himself. No, he said as he walked over to the body and drew his sword. I'll deal with him myself. He was a good man. A short savage stroke beheaded the body. As the others collected fallen wood from the tree line, having first all stared at the warnings, which were making him a very popular man, Tyrion stroked his chin and frowned at the sensation of a fledgling beard rasping against his fingers as he thought about the problem. As the first flames started to rise and the pieces of white were thrown onto it, why did whites burn so easily? He came to a decision. I think I have a solution to the matter of getting you through the Black Gate, Tyrion muttered. Uncle Gerion, Robb and Jon Stark, would you please draw your swords? 3 swords, placed in a triangle around, Rickon Stark here. And then perhaps we might be able to escort him, in a way, through the Black Gate. First Ranger, would you open it please? The Stark brothers looked at each other doubtfully for a moment, before turning to the non-white, was that the best term, in front of them. With your permission, Robb Stark said, we would not force you. Oh, you'll have to force me, their ancestor replied, but you have my permission. He watched as one sword was held to one side, met with another sword, and then finally Brightraw was added to complete the triangle. Cold Hands winced visibly, pulling his arms close to his body, but then eventually nodded. We can try this. Someone will need to get my elk though. He and I have been though much together, and I would not see him abandoned north of the wall, not before a long winter. It was Val who took the reins of the rather skittish elk, before soothing it by stroking its muzzle. The elk burbled and then shook its head a little, but followed her as they all slowly walked to the no-open Black Gate, where a solemn Benjen Stark was waiting. Tyrion never forgot that passage through the wall. The man they were escorting let out a choked scream as they forced him through the gate and then slowly down the passageway, twisting in place at times and jerking. The closer he got to the middle of the passage and the wall, the more he jerked. As for the screaming, Tyrion wished he could stop his ears up, but he dared not. By the time that they reached the other side of the Black Gate, everyone looked tired and strained, but at least Cold Hands had stopped making noises. He just walked slowly, his eyes showing a pain and weakness that grew with every step. Bugger me, Thorn said ahead of them, as the Valyrian steel blades were finally sheathed. Where did this passageway come from? I found it, Tormund Giantsbane told him with a fierce grin. Me and my sledgehammer here. There was a bricked-up doorway here, as I said, and then another going up, and then another up again. Bricked up. Cold Hands said slowly as he looked at the metal rungs to one side. I don't understand, there was always a passage here. It has been a long time since you were last here, Brother Benjen Stark told him sadly. The Night Fort was abandoned centuries ago because it could not be maintained. It is being restored now, but it's not yet in a fit state. He looked at him more closely. What is wrong? I am dying, Cold Hands whispered. The passage through the wall has weakened me, and the magic that protected me cannot be felt here. It is the wall. I need to get to a heart tree. Quickly, brother. The first ranger grabbed the left arm of Cold Hands and placed it around his shoulders and then supported him as he staggered over the planks that crossed the well and then up the passageway, the others following them. The elk just about fitted into the passageway, its low moans of concern for its rider echoing up from behind Tyrion as the direwolves ran on ahead. As they reached the doorway at the end and negotiated the rubble, Cold Hands looked about in dismay. "It's worse than I had ever thought," he groaned. "I heard that it had been abandoned, but to see it like this." "It will be restored," Brother Benjen Stark told him almost fiercely, before helping him to the godswood not too far away. There they laid him at the base of the heart tree, so that he could look up and see the sky through the leaves, with Thorn's rolled up cloak under his head. "I must do this," Cold Hands muttered as he pulled off his gloves. His hands were black and Tyrion winced a little as he looked at them. And then he stared. There was a red fire burning in the eyes of the prone man, and as he watched that red fire started to burn hotter and hotter. Little wisps of flame seemed to flicker down to his hands, and after a long moment he realized that it was forming a ball of red fire. Brighter and brighter the fire grew until Tyrion could barely look at it as he raised a hand in front of his eyes. Brighter still, and then it stopped. Tyrion heard Cold Hands say, in a voice like a mountain speaking, "Bind the land again. Restore the links between north and south. The green seers must see each other again." And then the great red ball of fire sank into the heart tree, or that was what he could see through his fingers and squinted eyes. As it vanished into the tree he saw to his astonishment that it had left no trace on the trunk. There was a long pause, and then Cold Hands "No," Rickon Stark lowered his shaking hands. Tyrion was about to ask what that had been about when he noticed that the heart tree was starting to glow, with a throb that reminded him of a pulse. It did not get as bright as the ball of fire had been, but it was there, and suddenly he took a hesitant step backwards. The wall. The wall was also glowing red. The wall was glowing. The others had noticed as well, from the shocked cries, and then it flared once and went back to its usual color. "What in the name of the old gods was that?" Robb Stark asked. "Is the wall all right?" "Fear not," Rickon Stark quavered. "North will talk, to south again. My mission, for the children of the forest, is complete at last. At long last, the green men will be able to see where they could not. As will the children." Something rose in Tyrion's breast, an excitement he had seldom felt before. There were children of the forest out there, as Mance Rayder had said. Cold Hands was fading fast now though, as his gestures became weak and sluggish. "It will take time for the links though. Be watchful. The others will soon know of this. It is a great blow to them." He reached out and grabbed the hand of Benjen Stark, who was kneeling over him. "When I die, cut my head off, and burn me, brother. Ashes, take my ashes to Winterfell. I would sleep in the crypts there." Benjen Stark nodded, with hunched tears in his eyes, and his nephews nodded next to him. But oddly it was Sir Alliser Thorne who spoke next. "First Ranger, our brother Rickon Stark has stood his watch, the longest watch of any man of the Night's Watch. He has done his duty as few could. Is he relieved?" "He stands relieved," Brother Benjen Stark said, and then they watched as Rickon Stark smiled a little and then went still, his eyes unseeing. "Robb. Uncle Benjen. May I borrow ice for a moment?" Robb Stark drew it without a word and handed it over. His uncle lifted it with both hands, stood and then nodded at the body on the ground. "Goodbye, brother." The great sword came down with a thud. Sleep well. Chapter 30. Chapter text. Ned. He stared down at the horn and frowned a little. There was something about it that made him, well, he wasn't sure what the word was. Uneasy was too strong. He just had the feeling that there was something odd about it. The runes were odd. They were old. And strange. They looked like an old variant of the tongue of the first men. Maester Eamon had consulted a book in his library about it, but they were still largely unenlightened. Why was it buried? If it was important, why not leave it in the Overlook? He ran a hand over his beard. "And what is it?" "The Overlook was being forgotten," Gia Mormont grunted. "Perhaps it was a way of making sure that it would be preserved and could be found." Ned raised an eyebrow slightly. From what Sir Jeremy and Tolit said, the others were searching the first of the first men for something. What if they were searching for this? Then that brings it back to what is it? That was a good point, and Ned snorted slightly. Until we know what the runes say, then all we can do is keep guessing. And they're old runes. Maester Eamon thinks that there might be some books on old runes in the north in Winterfell. And perhaps in Surestone. He scowled a little. I shall enjoy trying that Riverlander bastard for murdering old Lord Surestone. I still can't believe that he's dead, Gia muttered, shaking his head. A good man. A gentle man. Unless you were fighting against him, that is. He was deadly with that axe. Especially on a horse. I remember him on the trident, Ned replied with a fond smile. It was a good thing that Barristan Selmy was wounded when he was. It might have been very nasty for him, as Lord Surestone was 10 yards away from him and on a rampage. I remember when, but whatever Gia had been about to say was interrupted by the shouts of alarm from outside. They stared at each other and then they bolted for the door. Opening it, they could see that everyone at Castle Black was staring at the wall. Which was glowing. Glowing red. He gaped at the wall as well, his mouth hanging open. It pulsed red, once more, and then it returned to its normal state. He watched it warily for a long moment and then turned to Gia, who was still gaping in horror, although as he looked at the very much still intact wall, that horror was turning into relief. What in the name of the old gods was that? It affected the whole wall, from what I could see, Gia muttered as the shocked inhabitants of Castle Black started to recover. Then he paused. Raider, he said that child of the forest had told him that he had to help fix the wall, the magic links between north of the wall and south. Perhaps that was it. Ned paused and then nodded. It might be that. We need to find out what's happened at the night fort. We should have given Robb and his party a raven. Didn't think we'd need them to have it, Gia said as he kept staring at the wall. Ned, the color the wall turned, it was like the color your eyes turned when the old gods possessed you. He absorbed that for a long moment. That might be a good thing then. He peered at the wall again. Seems intact. I'll go talk to the builders. The Lord Commander muttered, before heading down the stairs. He was passed by a rather excited Maester Eamon, who was holding a book. Well, that was an excitement indeed, Lord Stark, the old man said jovially. I heard one of my brothers who was close to the wall say that heard what almost sounded like a heartbeat within the wall for a moment. You aren't alarmed? The old Maester paused in contemplation for a moment and then shook his head. Oddly enough, no. The wall still stands, intact. A child of the forest said that the wall had a flaw and that it would be fixed. It's logical that it was that happening. Then he raised an eyebrow. Of course it would be prudent to check. Ned led him back into Gia's solar, where they both sat down. Lord Stark, the message from Cotter Pike and young Redwine has been bothering me since it arrived this morning. I do not doubt a word of what they wrote, well, what Redwine wrote, as Pike lacks his letters, but something struck me as strange. They wrote of finding the remains of a dragon, with white bones. But dragon bone is not white, it is black. I grew up with the evidence in front of me, and you must have seen it as well, when you reached the Red Keep when the city fell. Now that was a dark memory. The throne room had been the place where Father and Brandon had both been murdered. He'd seen the spots where they had died. Seeing the dead body of Aerys Targaryen had not been enough. Not for vengeance. But it had had to do. As for the lounging youth on the Iron Throne, with his blooded sword and arrogant smile, well, he had disliked Jaime Lannister for a long time. And then there had been the dragon skulls. And Maester Eamon was right, the bones had been black and not white. Then what was the creature? Maester Eamon opened the book he was holding. The description rang a faint bell in my mind, and I looked up a reference I remember reading years ago. There was an account of a tale told by a man of the Night's Watch who had been on a ranging far to the north. He saw the bones of a great creature by the mouth of a cave. White bones. He had acquaintances amidst the wildlings. I really should start calling them free folk now, should I not? And they said that it was the remains of an ice wyrm, also known as an ice drake. Ned stared at him. I thought that they were naught but legends. Were it not for the dragon skulls in the Red Keep, men might have said the same of dragons. We will know better once the bone samples that they took arrive here, along with the eggs. His eyes darkened a little for a moment. I have seen dragon eggs. I will be able to spot any differences. Ned nodded slowly, his mind racing. But he said slowly, thinking it all through, if the legends of ice drakes are true, then what else might be out there? There are legends that the others used to hunt men with ice spiders, creatures big enough that the others rode them like we do with horses. What if they exist as well? Maester Eamon was as pale as Ned now felt. That would, I fear, also be logical. We must consult the oldest of the books here again. And ask your new allies the Thans if any member of the Free Folk has seen anything like that. Our enemies are mysterious enough and time is on their side, not ours. Every advantage that they have must be identified as soon as possible. Kevan. He peered at the ballista carefully, and then at the face of the eager young puppy in charge of the defenses of the part of Lannisport Harbor that he had been inspecting for the past day or so. Then he sighed a little. Does it work? The eager young man beamed at him. Yes, Sir Kevan. You've tested it? Yes, Sir Kevan. The principle is very sound. The rope is tied to the back of the bolt, so when the signal is given the ballista bolt is loosed at the causeway over there, where a special area has been cleared. Kevan looked over at the causeway, which was actually the breakwater that protected the harbor from storms from the north. Yes, there was indeed a sort of bearish place there. The practicalities of hitting such a spot in a storm, or in an emergency still concerned him, but he could see the way that it was designed to work. And then the rope is detached from the bolt over there and taken to the winches and the capstan, where it is secured, and then they pull their end and we pay out ours. The rope is tied to a bigger rope, which leads to a hawser, which leads to a chain, and then that chain leads to the great chain boom of Lannisport, securing the harbor. Ingenious. He peered at the boy. Does it work though? A slight grimace told him that there must have been teething troubles, but then a nod. Yes, Sir Kevan, although we have to pay close attention to the direction and strength of the wind at times. What happens if it falls short? We have a man in a boat. Kevan nodded and then looked up at the watchtowers that sat on the cliffs to either side of the harbor. They were far taller than the old ones had been. Tywin had sworn that the Ironborn would never be allowed to repeat what they had done at the start of Greyjoy's madness, the name that he had long since given the insane rebellion. The memory of that night, as he and his brothers saw the glow of the burning fleet and the burning town in the distance. He'd had nightmares about that for years afterwards. Well, never again. The defenses had been rebuilt and strengthened. The Ironborn would never be trusted again. And should they try to attack again, then they would be thrown back into the sea. On fire. And with bushels of arrows in them. He nodded again, and then something occurred to him. Whose idea was this, by the way? The young pup's face stilled, and then he inspected his boots carefully for a moment. It was suggested. By whom? Some months back, there was a visitor from Casterly Rock who was headed north, and he suggested a few things, and... He forestalled the man with a raised hand. It was my nephew Tyrion, wasn't it? The younger man nodded hesitantly, almost as if he was afraid of Kevan's reaction. Instead Kevan smiled. Good. Tyrion always does have good ideas. Well done. And with that he mounted his horse and rode back into the port, his guards following closely behind him. He loved Lannisport on days like today, with the sun shining and the wind blowing. The harbor was crowded with ships from all over the place, the Westerlands, the Reach, the North, Dawn, the Stormlands. There were even some Ironborn, although fewer than usual, and all being carefully watched. Whatever was happening there, and the latest tales were of near civil war there, it meant that most Ironborn ships were headed for their home ports at the moment. Oh, and there was the occasional ship from even further away, such as Bravos, Pentos and even Volantis. He thought for a moment of poor, dead Geryon, and he sighed. Then he frowned. A ship was mooring at a nearby wharf, from the Reach by the look of it. And there was a man on the deck of that ship who looked very familiar. He was bald and had a grey beard, and he was wearing a plain doublet, but the massive sword that was strapped to his back was distinctive. He knew him. Kevan turned his horse and nudged it forwards towards the ship. As he approached the now motionless vessel, he watched as the crew bustled around with the gangplank. The man with the grey beard had spotted him and was watching him with folded arms. As soon as the gangplank was in place, he strode off the ship and then walked towards Kevan. The last time we met was at Pike. It was Kevan replied as he dismounted and pulled off his riding gauntlets. How have you been, Randil? The Lord of Hornhill pulled off his own gloves and took his outstretched hand before grinning at him. Well enough, Kevan, well enough. They shook hands, something that always tended to be a form of small-scale warfare with Randil Tali. What are you doing here? You seldom leave the Reach. Tali tucked his gloves into his belt with a sigh and then jerked his head at the wharf. Walk with me. Kevan obliged, and when they were in an area with few onlookers raised an eyebrow. What's amiss? This prompted a moment of genuine uncertainty from the old veteran, who seemed to be having trouble finding the right words. Finally he said, how loud was the call at Casterly Rock? Ah. Kevan pulled a face. Confused. Tywine denies it. I am more open-minded. Why? Tali stared at him and then licked his lips with what looked like nervousness. It struck Hornhill like nothing else I can imagine. Like a bolt from the blue. And the dreams that followed it, well, I had dreams of the Field of Fire and worse. He stared back at the other man. What could be worse than the Field of Fire? Tali passed a hand over his face. Best not to ask, he sighed. Anyway, my eldest son, Samwell, had dreams that were just as bad. Kevan eyed the other man carefully. There had been odd tales of Samwell Tali and his father's efforts to make him more martial. What happened? The Lord of Hornhill looked about carefully. Have you heard about Lord Willers Tyrell effectively taking over the Reach? He had indeed, an event that had prompted Tywine to grunt, oh, whoa, poor Mace, not that he would admit to witnessing that, so he just nodded. It happened partly because Lord Willers holds Otherbane, the spear of the Gardener Kings. A weapon of the first men. It was in Hornhill, hidden there. Waiting for him. Young Samwell puzzled out the clues. I did not see them. Tali was red-faced and then shook his head. T was the oddest thing. He saw it, I did not. He looked up. And now I am headed for Winterfell. Why Winterfell? A wintry smile crossed Tali's face. The others come. The Stark calls for aid. I am needed. The smile vanished. Lord Willers has sent me to talk with Lord Stark. We need more information about how to fight the others. I have some small experience of fighting. It seemed fitting to ask me to go. Kevan nodded, even as he wanted to reel with shock. This confirmed quite a lot. The port was humming with talk of the call, with talk of sending aid to the wall. And now the least imaginative man that Kevan knew, a man grounded in solid reality, was saying that it was all true. He almost wanted to throw up. Instead he rubbed a hand that he fought hard to stop from trembling over his jaw. You are sure then? I am. The words were said with every certainty. We've docked to take in supplies and then we sail north. Past Cape Kraken and then as far into Blazewater Bay as we can get, so that I can get to Moat Cailin and the King's Road. We heard that there's unrest in the Iron Islands though. Kevan pulled a face. You might say that. Latest news is that Balon Greyjoy has declared Lord Harlaw a traitor, or something close to that. There are reports of fighting. Nothing yet confirmed though. Tali's nostrils flared for a moment. Then if necessary I will tell the captain to veer westwards to avoid the bloody Iron Islands. I must get to Winterfell though. He nodded in response, but he in turn knew something himself. He had to get back to Casterly Rock. Jory. Being married was different. His quarters were bigger now, no, their quarters. Anna had brought a light not just to his life but also to their joint quarters. For one thing he had more shirts that weren't badly darned, something he'd never been that good at, and for another those shirts weren't all white. Then there the other things. He talked a lot more, to her at least. And he ached a lot more. Certain muscles hurt quite a bit after particularly amorous nights. His uncle kept looking at him and then smirking a lot. What he most admired about his wife was her fierce loyalty, to him and to young Lord Robert, who kept going from strength to strength. He was so changed from that pale little boy with the shadows under his eyes in King's Landing. He rode every day now, he was becoming adept with the bow and arrow and an unholy little terror with the sword. Training dummies did not last long when he was around. But above all he wanted to know things. and Anna had been delighted to see that he had made new friends. Young Bran Stark and Edric Storm made up the other two-thirds of the terrible threesome, a name that was spreading throughout Winterfell. A crime, it was, to give him that poison Anna had told him once, when they were entwined one evening, still sweaty. He's a bright, happy lad without it. Lady Arryn committed a crime indeed. It had been a crime, and Jory had noticed that Lady Stark seldom, if ever, talked about her sister anymore, and when she did it was with a careful look about for Robert, followed by a sigh and then a deep frown. He looked over at the training yard and suppressed a smile. The terrible threesome were there, being given a stern lecture by Domeric Bolton about how to use a sword and not almost chop off the head of the person standing next to you. Young Edric was looking a bit abashed about this, and Jory knew that he had been swinging his warhammer a bit too freely of late, as someone else had apparently commented that they thought that swords could be a bit showier than warhammers. Riders coming. It was a distant shout from the main gates, and he turned to look at them. There was a slight flurry on the ramparts, and then his uncle appeared from a postern gate, walking quickly towards him. A party from the Riverlands, bearing the banners of House Tully, Uncle Roderick muttered as he looked about the courtyard. Then he saw a young servant. You. Fetch Lady Stark. Tell her a party bearing Tully colours is coming, and look sharp about it. The boy more than looked sharp, he ran. As the party came through the gates, Jory frowned. They were led by a pair of armsmen bearing the Tully banners, followed by a far older man with a white beard and the look of someone who would spit death himself in the eye when his time came and then try and kick him in the balls. All the armed men in the party were wearing the distinctive fishtail armor of the Riverlands except for one. The exception was a shortish man with dark hair who was wearing basic traveling leathers. He had dark hair and was sporting a truly impressive black eye around his right eye. His hands were bound to the pommel of the saddle of his horse, which was being led by one of the riders in front of him, and his eyes kept darting about, directing angry, hateful glances in all directions. Oh, and there were the wagons that entered after the party, wagon after wagon after wagon. There must have been almost 20 of them, and Jory stared in wonder. What in the name of the old gods was this little lot? Fortunately Lady Stark soon arrived, and although she stopped and stared at the group, it was not for the same reason as Jory. No, she stared at the old man who led the party and who had dismounted in a trice at her arrival and then bowed formally. Edmund. Is that truly you? Lady Stark asked with a smile. Lady Catelyn, I beg pardon, Lady Stark it is now. How have you been? The older man smiled fondly at Lady Stark. You are still missed at Riverrun. Lady Stark laughed and then walked up to the man and embraced him lightly. All the better for seeing you, Edmund. You are the one who first taught me how to use a dagger. The fond smile redoubled. You learn it fast. Then the smile went away. On the orders of your father and brother I have brought Sir Willem Bootle to Winterfell to meet justice. Ah, thought Jory, so that's who the wretched man was. He looked at the prisoner, who was looking around in sullen fury, before finally bursting out, I am Lord Shuristone. Release me at once, you. He seemed to choke off his words as every man around him glared and placed a hand on his sword, including Jory, who let out a snarl. Lady Stark was not going to be insulted whilst he drew breath. You are mistaken, Sir Willem, Lady Stark replied calmly, showing that she was worth 1,000 of the wretched man. You were never the heir to Shuristone. I am the only male heir, the man all but shrieked. Shuristone is mine to do with as I please. No, said a voice behind Jory, who turned to see Daisy Shuristone standing there, his Anna next to her. Shuristone is mine. I am the heir to my father. He left Shuristone to me, not to you. You were never his heir. Something happened to Bootle at that moment. As he looked at Lady Shuristone, all the blood seemed to flee his face. You still live. I thought that, and then he flushed and shut his mouth with an audible snap of his teeth. You thought what, Sir Willem? Daisy Shuristone's eyes had narrowed and she glared at him so hard that Jory wondered why he had not burst into flame. Was it you who caused me to be trapped at that inn? Was it you who told the innkeeper to try and turn me into a whore? Did you give him other orders? The wretched man worked his jaw for a moment, his eyes flitting from person to person as he looked about desperately. I should have been his heir, he said at last. You are naught but a bookish girl. Lady Shuristone looked at him with utter contempt. Do you know why my father made me his heir instead of you? You were never worthy enough. Everyone looked at her for a moment, and for that moment she seemed to be the tallest person in the courtyard. Edmund cleared his throat and bowed to her. Lady Sherestone. I am Edmund, in service to Riverrun. Those wagons contain what this man stole from your home. He glared at Bootle, who flinched from his gaze. He was trying to find a man called Callis, whom he owed a great deal of coin to. Callis was hung months ago for being a thief in the service of Petter Baelish. Lady Stark sighed. Ah, she said eventually. You made the wrong kind of acquaintances, Sir Willem. How much coin? Is that why you needed to loot my cousin's keep, the one you pretended that you were heir to, because you were desperate? You avoid my gaze, sir. She looked at Edmund. Has he tried to flee? Oh, several times. The Riverlander sniffed contemptuously. He never got far though. Last time I had to smack him one, my lady. Good. Lady Stark looked around for Uncle Roderick, who was standing to one side. Sir Roderick. We need this man confined to await his trial once Lord Stark returns from Castle Black. She looked at Bootle again, who again flinched as if he had been struck. Guard him well. He will face his worst nightmare justice. Robb. They planned to leave the night fort as soon as they could. The captured wildlings were left in the charge of a grim-faced group of builders from Castle Black who were given very specific orders from Sir Alisa Thorne that they were to be used as workers for a week and then sent south with whoever Mance Rayder sent from Castle Black. Two things had happened before they left. The first thing had been the cremation of Cold Hands, once known as Rickon Stark. That had been a solemn moment, with the surviving members of the Night's Watch standing in front of the funeral pyre with their swords bared in salute. Robb, John and Theon had joined them, as had the wildlings. We called him the Wanderer, Rayder said quietly. We never knew why he was wandering, we just knew he was out there and that he was patiently waiting for someone or something. And now he is at peace. The second thing happened as the remains of the pyre cooled and were being raked through for bones by Uncle Benjen and Sir Alisa. Geryon Lannister, with his son next to him, had called Tyrion and himself to one side. I need to talk to you, the one-eyed Lannister said quietly. Tyrion, have you been dreaming recently? Not ordinary dreams, dreams of things that later come true. Tyrion Lannister stared at his uncle as he went a little pale. Perhaps, he said reluctantly. Before we helped Cold Hands I had a dream a night or two before. I was running down a passage with something important in my hands and I knew that I had to be somewhere. And some months ago I had a dream of a future that must never come to pass. His uncle returned the stare. How bad was it? I was leading men south from the Westerlands to the Reach, all that remained of the strength of the Westerlands. Casterly Rock had fallen to the others, who were also besieging Winterfell. King Robert had vanished somewhere in the Riverlands. It was bad. Geryon Lannister nodded slowly and then looked at his son, who was also pale, and who nodded ever so slightly. Green Seers, Geryon said eventually. It runs in the blood. My son has the green sight. And I have a touch of it too. Not much, not compared to Illyrian, but enough to make me aware that things are happening here in the north that are important. Robb and Tyrion both stared at the two others, who both looked back levelly. Eventually it was Tyrion who broke the silence. You hinted that you had been drawn here to the Night Fort. Was it because you dreamt of that fight? I dreamt that us not arriving here in time would mean the difference between narrow victory and bloody defeat, Illyrian said quietly. But if that meant in terms of the fight here or the larger fight ahead, I cannot say. I do not know. Interpreting the dreams can be hard. The son of a friend of my father is a Green Seer, Robb muttered. He might be able to advise on such things. Any more dreams you can tell us about? Father and son swapped another gaze. I dreamt of an empty lion whose fate depended on him talking to a weretree that walked, Illyrian Lannister said eventually. I dreamt of storms that grew and stones that shone. I dreamt of a wolf that seemed to be made of water, which snarled at a rotted hand emerging from ice. And I dreamt of a blooded wolf before a door to a hole in the world. Tyrion Lannister's eyebrows had been going up and down a lot at all of this. More puzzles, more riddles, he muttered eventually. We must work these out. He looked at the remains of the pyre, where the last of the bones had been reclaimed from the ashes and which were now interred in a small box. Back to Castle Black at once, I think. Even if we have to ride through the night. Thorne's right, the Lord Commander will have to be told of all of this. And Lord Stark. As Tyrion Lannister stumped off, with Illyrian next to him, the latter's father held up a hand for a moment. I need to talk to your father, Tyrion Lannister muttered quietly. This is important. Robb Stark, I am not my brother. I am not obsessed with power, I am merely driven with wanting to remain alive, my family above all. And I had a dream that my son did not, one that you will understand better than anyone. I dreamt of a man within a younger man, a man who, well, I dreamt of twin towers that fired crossbow quarrels at a young wolf, who was then killed by a flayed man, before falling through the years. Your face was there. Do not worry, I will keep your secret. I must talk to your father though. Shock roiled through him for a long moment and he had to stiffen his spine so as not to look about to make sure that no one was eavesdropping. Oh, you may be assured of that, he said just as quietly. Tyrion Lannister nodded at him and then strode off. Robb smoothed his face and then walked over to his own horse, which was being held by Jon, and who took one look at his face and frowned. What's wrong? I'll tell you on the road, Robb replied. Let me know if you start dreaming though. Dreaming? There are green seers riding amongst us. Come on, there's a lot to tell, father. Aye, and that's a bloody understatement, Jon replied as they both heaved themselves into their saddles. Plus Alisa Thorne keeps giving me funny looks because of my sword. Robb sighed a little as the others also mounted. Something else to talk about on the road. He looked to one side where Val was seated on her horse and staring fixedly at the gates. He had a sudden feeling that life was going to be complicated soon. Ride. Uncle Benjen roared and they all obeyed, trotting out of the gates and then riding south, before turning towards the road to Castle Black. Boulogne. The room was silent apart from the crackling of the fire and the distant sound of the waves. He stared at the messages scattered across the top of his desk and then sighed and passed a hand over his face, willing the fingers to be still and not shake. Aaron was sitting by the fire, staring into the flames, his long hair shrouding his face. The bloody man was brooding yet again. It was about all he did these days. These days, he had to admit that he did not have as much control over the Iron Islands as he might have liked. The fighting and dissension was spreading. Even the Greenlanders had heard that something was wrong. There had been a message that morning from Baratheon, or rather from his hand, Stannis fucking Baratheon, telling him to cease this conflict between you and your lords and restore peace to the Iron Islands. He'd been trying to do just that, didn't the fools know? But that fool Victorian had bungled things badly, so much so that almost his entire force had been lost. A handful of ships had returned, all with wounded men. The survivors had spoken of the cunning of that thrice-damned man Harlaw. The reader was more than just a reader, he could fight as well. And now he didn't know what to do. He was Lord of the Iron Islands in name only at times. He had control of Pike, Saltcliffe and Black Tide. Harlaw and his band of rebels controlled Harlaw, Great Wyk and Old Wyk. As for Orkmont, well, the place was apparently on a knife edge, feverish with unrest but caught between the two sides. He had to face facts. This was more than a rebellion now, he was fighting a civil war. House Greyjoy's rule over the Iron Islands was now in peril almost bad as what had happened at the end of the war. You must send more men, Aaron said suddenly, still staring into the flames. Harlaw must be stopped. There are few left to send, Boulogne replied bitterly. We need to keep what remains of the Iron Fleet here, to protect Pike from attack. I can call on support from Saltcliffe and Black Tide, but they will be reluctant to send their full strength. They will be vulnerable. They should obey your orders. You are Lord of the Iron Islands. He smiled bitterly. I am the Lord in name only at the moment. We face an impasse at the moment. A door opened to one side and he turned quickly to snarl at whoever had dared to enter, only to stop, shocked into stillness. Well, hello there, brother. And damn fair too, what a surprise. Euron. It was Euron. He was standing there, bold as brass, dressed in dark leathers. A patch covered one eye and a smirk was plastered to his face. Have you missed me, brothers? After a moment Boulogne swallowed his shock. You. What are you doing here? Euron smirked a little harder and then swaggered even over to the table, where he sat in a chair, leant back and stuck both feet on the table. Why, he said with a wave of his hands, I am here to support my lord brother against the vile rebels. How could I stay away? Aaron eyed him darkly. You were exiled. On pain of death. He looked at Balon. Kill him. Their brother laughed. Ah, is Victorian still upset about his wife? Such a shame he was captured on Harlaw. He killed her. He stared at Euron, who did not react at all to that news. But you already knew that. Aaron's right, I should order you killed. How did you even get in here? This got him a pained look. Balon, this is castle where I grew up. I know every nook and cranny in this place and certainly all the secret ways. It would be embarrassing if I couldn't get here unseen. Except for the guard whose throat I slit, that is. The smirk intensified. Besides, you can't kill me. I am the man who will win this war for you, this war that you have bungled so very badly. It was hard, but he repressed the snarl and the need to rip out his brother's throat with a spoon. And how do you plan to win this conflict? There was something about the smirk that Balon now found rather uncomfortable. It was the smirk of a man who knew something that he did not. I know how badly this war of yours is going. I know about Harlaw and the Stonerbrows. If you to win this war, then you have to kill them. You've tried and you've failed. You need to get them to come to you. He glared at the man. And how do you suggest that happen? They will never come here unless they have won. Euron looked at him with a gaze that combined pity, derision and no small amount of contempt. Then you call a parley. They need the Iron Islands to be united so that they can meet the need of the call. Don't bristle like that, damn fair. Only an idiot would deny that it went out. So should you call for a parley to discuss peace, then they will eventually listen. Are you insane? If I break guests' rights, then even the lowliest house on the Iron Islands would never trust me again. Euron's face rippled slightly with emotion at the use of the word insane, but he seemed to pull himself together and then smirk again. It's very simple. You call a parley with the Reader and the Stonerbrows. You promise guests' rights. You meet them on, say, the north shore of this island, for talks, and then, Euron smirked viciously. Well, you can't be blamed if your exiled and notorious brother, who just happens to also be dashing and brilliant, returns, gets the wrong end of the stick and through a tragic misunderstanding kills the rebels. There was a long silence as Balon thought all of this through. You would kill them and then claim it was all a mistake. You might have granted guests' rights, but who could have known that I would choose that moment to return? The blame would all be on me. Until you purged their followers, that is, and resumed your rightful rule over all the Iron Islands. The smirk returned. And what would you get out of this? Aaron asked the question that was already on Balon's mind. You never suggest anything without it benefiting you in some manner. Oh, so cynical, brother Euron, chided the drowned man. Can't I help my own family for the glory of the drowned god? The glory of the drowned god? You dare speak of the drowned god in such a fashion? You are not a pious man. Euron sprang to his feet with a scornful laugh. Oh, damn fair, you always were a poor, blind, fool. You never did see the real world, the true world. I have seen things that would have driven lesser men like you raving mad. I have seen wonders and terrors and marvels and monsters. You think that I deny the drowned god? He took a step closer to his brother, who had also stood up. I know what he is far better than you ever will. And, other things. Oh, so many other things. Something else passed over his face, a rich medley of fleeting emotions that included horror, wonder and madness. Whatever it was, Aaron shrank back from that face, his eyes suddenly very wide. There was a long moment of tension and then Euron wiped the look from his face and then the smirk was back as he turned again to Balon. Think over my idea, brother. Think it over. He walked over to the door. I'll be back in 3 days. And then he was gone, sauntering out of the door as if he didn't have a care in the world. Balon and Aaron stared at the door as it closed and then slowly sat back down again. You can't trust him, his brother said after a while, as he seemed to collect himself. That man's mad. He's always been mad. He stared into the flames of the fire. Mayhaps. You're not considering this, are you? Balon pulled a face. I'm thinking about it. It might work. And what does he get out of it? Oh, I know what he wants. He wants to be my heir. After all, Asher has betrayed me, and from all reports Theon is a Stark in all but name now. The Ironborn will never follow him. Aaron stared at him as if he was mad. Euron can never be allowed to be your heir. The man would lead us to death and destruction. He'll never be my heir. Asher may have betrayed me, but I still have hopes for her. He leant back in his chair, deep in thought. This will take some careful planning. His brother stared at him again, but then seemed to shake himself and then resume his own brooding, the room silent again apart from the crackle of the fire and the boom of the surf. Yes, both careful thought and planning indeed. Eamon. He gripped the wood.